on debate night. Okay. Oops. And that is unfortunate. Okay, so where? Oh, that's right. That's the old setup. There we are. That's the new setup. Okay. Boomer moment. Okay, wonderful. So let's reconfigure your icon so that your webcam's actually in place. Let's go. We're just gonna move that right now. And where was it? Opponent icon. Okay, and then with that, we can set up a window capture over to the Discord call so that we can put your live feed in there. Let's see, where was it? Window capture. There we are. And let's get that set up. And we will configure this. Let's see, we're just going to move that under here. Yeah, let's just where were we at? And down here. And with that, we can expand this out. And then we're going to put that behind the overlay and configure that down. And then should be almost good to go. Let's see, which one was that? That was the window capture down there. And that's about, let's see. Yeah, that's about as full as we can get you in the frame here. Okay, so wonderful. So let's get into the debate. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. Tonight's the debate night. We got back-to-back debate. We did a debate last night on Israel. Tonight we're debating Base Blue Dog here at Base Blue Dog. So feel free to introduce yourself, tell you the people where they can follow you, and then feel free to go into your opening statement because you're the challenger. You get to go first.
Thank you, and it's great to be on here on debate night tonight. So thank you for having me. Obviously. My name is Base Blue Dog. You can follow me at Base Blue Dog. It's on Twitter. It's the only really social media I have. So tonight we are debating China, and this is a topic I think everyone's really anxious or excited about. So obviously, when combating China, China has numerous violations that I think almost everyone can agree on.
Yeah.
They do bad. But when you're over, I think everything deserves its own little issue. But there's three things we really have to focus on. Three main pictures that we have to really look at. And obviously, number one is we've got to end the Uyghur genocide. We need to do all that we can do to end the Uyghur genocide. And two, and I'm way more into depth on that, and two is that we need to take on the horrible violations of religious freedom there. Especially one law that we particularly need to combat, though, regarding that minors are banned from religious activities such as churches and mosques, and in the province where the Uyghur genocide is happening, it's incredibly worse. It's they can't even follow their daily prayer rituals for the Muslims there, and they have to eat pork, which goes against their religion. And the third issue is Hong Kong. We, of course, have to stand with our Hong Kong democracy freedom fighters there, people who are basically protesting and demanding freedom, and I completely stand with them. We have to, we need to do more for Hong Kong refugees, and it was quite frankly shameful that Senator Ted Cruz of Texas was one of the key. He likes to talk a big game on standing tough on China and standing with Hong Kong, but he was the single reason why a refugees bill failed to pass the Senate. So quite frankly, I found that very shameful. But I'm glad that the United Kingdom was able to come up with a refugees bill for the Hong Kong people. And I think those are the three main issues that we need to focus on with China. And I'd love to hear what you
where you
stand on that.
Yeah, so I think we're basically in agreement because, at least in principle here, because I talk a fair bit about the Uyghur genocide and the absolute atrocities that are unfolding there, upwards of 2 million people in concentration camps. I've also talked a fair bit about what's happened in Hong Kong. And as far as the religious freedoms go, I mean, contrary to some brainlets' belief about me as an anti-theist, I actually support religious freedom. And I, of course, in a prominent debate with Revolt Rise, somebody who argued for the murder of Uyghurs, I defended them and I defended their right to go to mosque. And it's very clear that this is a country that we're dealing with that does not respect personal freedoms in any regard, views people as disposable, and is perfectly fine to condemn 2 million people to concentration camps and go about their day. And the thing is, so we're in agreement on the morality of the principle there that all of this is abhorrent. But I think what's important for our debate here is, how do we solve it? How do we address it? How do we go about creating a new status quo in which these problems are no longer blight on the Chinese people, and in which that regime is no longer a threat to us? Because the fourth dimension to this that I'll add as well is that not only are all of the problems that you noted there in your intro correct, but they're also a massive nuclear threat, bringing online 2 new missile fields containing upwards of 1,000 new nuclear weapons aimed at us, plus some new submarines that have SLBMs that they can launch at our shores without leaving their littoral zone, where they can defend themselves very well. So I guess my question to you, Blue Dog, would be, what is your solution to basically rectify the situation?
Well, China militarily, that's a much bigger decision, and I think some of our some of our presidential leaders who led during another crisis with an authoritarian and oppressive regime, which was the Soviet Union. Reagan had a great quote, I believe, and he said, basically, he talked about how we can never have a nuclear war. It'd be disastrous for our country. It'd be disastrous for everyone. So I think we need to make sure that we never end up in a massive war with China, and rather handle it more or less how we handled the Cold War with the Soviet Union. We did not have a nuclear war, obviously, and we didn't have a direct war with them. What I think we need to do is implement policies that can combat China in a more diplomatic way, while also still being, like, I consider myself a China hawk, and we need to do what we can, but I think we need to do it more diplomatically, such as how we did it with the Soviet Union. And I dream of one day where we have a moment where a president says, equivalent, where we had that moment where Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." I think we can have a moment with that with China, where we finally can defeat the Chinese influence,
Right.
The same way we did with the Soviet Union.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring up the Soviet Union, because I'll oftentimes bring that up as an example to say, hey, look, this is a playbook for how you deal with these types of regimes without actually having to go to war with them. The big difference between China and the Soviet Union, though, is that the Soviet Union was not in a position of owning a ton of debt, of Western debt, and they weren't in a position of having a ton of free trade with the West. There were a lot of restrictions on trading with China, or with the Soviet Union. The problem that I see with China, and why this is much more difficult to go about that way, is that we've had, as I see it at least, the establishment in the United States and other Western powers has been totally content to prop up and do business and enrich the CCP regime in order to make a quick buck, because there's cheap labor, basically slave labor there. They can pay slave wages to, and they can just ship that stuff back here and outsource all the factories from, the heartland of our countries. And so, as far as I would see a solution to go about doing that, because in order to do what Reagan did, you have to first get to that position where they're in a period of stagnation and where they're isolated from the world. And China is in a period of growth, and they're in a period of free trade with the world. What we need to do is to cut them off from trade first before we can look at going about bankrupting them. Would you support measures basically barring businesses from doing trade with China?
Well, I think that's a great idea in theory. Like, I love the sound of it, and I think we need to see what we can do to restrict trade for sure. But do I think that's realistic or could happen in this current state? No, but you know what I think could be really helpful with Chinese labor practices? Like, over the summer there was so much like social justice protests and all that, and a lot of it obviously like some horrible stuff, cities got burnt, and that was awful and terrible. But what they did, these protesters were somehow able to get the ears of these companies and have them do at least a few changes. I would love if these social justice people, I would love it if they could say, you know what, we're going to protest the use of the Chinese slave labor and basically force the companies themselves to have to make changes. And I think that would, and I think we also need to do a Buy American campaign, or buy at least from our allies, a campaign of, hey, try the individual consumer. Let's not buy made in Chinese products. But what I think is important here is that there's so many companies sponsoring the Olympics, and companies such as Airbnb, Coca-Cola, and I think we need to name them and we need to shame them for doing this. On an individual level, I think that's what we can do. And I urge all of the people, everybody watching this Discord call, to call out this Twitch debate, to call out these companies that are basically propping up the Chinese regime by sponsoring it. This Olympics.
Okay. Yeah, so as an individual level, I agree with that. I've had, for months on my show, almost a year now, I've been telling people, for me, I only buy alcohol from Australia now. And I tell other people, the best way that you as an individual can screw over the Communist Party is to buy Australian alcohol, because the CCP famously tried to cut off and isolate and bankrupt Australia, and it mostly backfired because Australia was able to substitute out buyers away from China, except their wine industry never recovered, and they're set to face over $2.5 billion of losses over the next 4.5 years as a result of their government actually taking a stand and saying, no, we're going to investigate the sources of the virus, and we're going to hold you to account on the Uyghur genocide. Now, for us as individuals, that's one thing that we can do, is stand in solidarity with our allies, or at least just buy domestically, buy products made domestically where possible. But on a systemic level, in terms of actually, having a large concrete effect on hurting the Communist Party, short of everybody doing what you're suggesting, I think there needs to be a very strict and clear set of guidelines and requirements by the government to essentially say, hey, look, we're in a Cold War, and just as you couldn't just do free trade and business with the Soviet Union, you can't do that with China. Because my worry, and I don't know if you feel this way, but my worry is that if we don't get serious about actually moving to cutting them off economically really quickly, which is going to hurt us too, we're definitely going to have to face a military confrontation with them down the road once they move to take the South China Sea, take land from the Philippines, take Taiwan, all of our allies, basically. And so you talked about how nuclear war, that it's not something that anybody wants. That's true, but I think, just as in the old Cold War, if a nuclear war happened, there was a very high likelihood it would have happened as a result of a miscalculation. And I think that we're gearing up for that sort of situation here with China. That I believe them. When they say they want Taiwan, I believe them. When they say they threaten to nuke Japan, I believe them on that. And I think that the risk that we run in not getting rid of them as soon as possible is that we might, even by accident, have a nuclear war with them. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I absolutely agree that China's very dangerous, and we need to keep an eye on their nuclear activity. Of course, I think that what's unfortunate is the U.S. hasn't even recognized Taiwan, or Canada, or UK, or many countries have not recognized Taiwan, and that's unfortunate. I think that we need to recognize Taiwan as a country. But what I also think is important here is that we need to prevent Chinese influence. Like right now, they're doing a huge campaign in Africa to try and win favor there. We
Right.
need to use we the U.S., Canada, United Kingdom. We need to build our influence there, and combat Chinese influence. They're like creating debtors, like they're getting people in massive debts they can't pay off, and then just basically taking over the area. So what we need to do is we need to spend foreign aid. I know some people don't like to say that, but it's a very small, minuscule part of our spending that I think is worth it to better the. It's not just a betterment for the people of the world. Obviously, we have to ensure that money is being spent legitimately and not corruptly. Although corruption is probably going to happen, but I mean, if you're truly somebody who has like a quote unquote progressive view of the world, I can't see anything more progressive than helping build up new nations of people who are living in just terrible poverty, and then also helping build up these countries to combat Chinese influence. So I think any way you slice the pie, it's a good deal for us. It's a good deal for these people, and it's a good deal to truly win the 21st century with the idea of freedom, like religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of press, and that's what the Chinese Communist Party feels the most, is freedom.
Right. So I'm basically in agreement with that on the international level. That, yeah, I think the extent to which they've been allowed to bring African and Southern Asian countries into indentured servitude to the CCP is it's disgraceful that we basically just let it happen and ignored it. And I agree with you on the foreign aid. I think that that's kind of a controversial thing because a lot of people have this not just isolationist with respect to intervention, but isolationist with respect to anything to do with the rest of the world. And foreign aid is one of those that a lot of people fail to see the value in it. I think that foreign aid should be conditional on a rejection of the CCP and CCP influence. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned, will corruption happen? Absolutely. These are countries that are in a state of vulnerability and weakness. And if we say, oh, well, there might be bribery or something, therefore we can't interact with them. Well, China's happy to accept that. They do bribery in their own country. And so I'm not too concerned with corruption there. We can deal with that after we deal with China. So I agree with you there. I would just say, though, that even if we did all of that, that wouldn't address the military threat of the Chinese mainland, though. And so for me, I think that a full nixing of trade would be the only way to ensure that they actually go bankrupt and collapse. Because even if we took away their empire in Africa and Sri Lanka and other parts of Southern Asia and Central Asia, even then they could still survive. They could still have a lot of leverage over us in other ways because of the trade relationship. And so I believe that the only way to solve this problem without a war is to end the trade relationship. But you said that you basically said that in reality that wouldn't really be that practical. Can you kind of expand on why you don't think that would be practical? Because I understand it would be painful, but I feel like if the only other alternative is a war, then it's ultimately the least painful course of action.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and in a perfect world and in theory, I could see that working. But I think right now there's too many businesses, there's too much Chinese influence. Unfortunately, on how we do stuff, there's so many these corporations who are using Chinese labor. They donate to the senators, they donate to presidents, house reps. So unfortunately, we just will never see a complete trade ban. I think what we instead should focus on is limiting trade with China.
Okay.
And I think we could I definitely think we should limit it, and then as you limit it more, and I think on an individual level, we need to call out companies that use, especially labor practices in the Uyghur Genocide province, but all of Chinese labor. We need to call these companies out. And I think we can do other things. I think certainly we could potentially get on what I think some senators may be able to agree on, is a compromise is like stuff such as you can't advertise made in China products on TV, or at least on government owned stations. I think there's certain actions that you can take that may be largely symbolic, but I think it's important that people know that, hey, that there is a symbolic, at least, Cold War against China. We oppose China, and I think you'll get more people saying, well, maybe I shouldn't buy Chinese products until we can completely take down the CCP, or at least weaken them to where they're no longer a human rights violator of some sort.
Yeah, I do think, though, especially on a personal level, it makes a lot of sense to put these companies on blast. You know, on my show, Gold Gang Rising with Spooky Nukies, Reese, we reacted a little while back to the CEO of Nike in an interview with, I think it was, what was it, CNBC Business or something. Basically, he said to them that Nike, and he's the acting, like, current CEO of Nike, he said that Nike was a company, quote, of China for China, unquote. And you look at that, they do business in America. They're based in America. He lives in America. Yet here he is mask off saying, well, you know, we only really care about the CCP, because they asked him about the genocide. And he said, look, basically translating his BS corporate speak, he basically said, we make our money here. And that's sad. And if we could create a culture where people woke up to this, that would be good. The only skepticism that I have towards this, though, is that at least in my neck of the woods, at least around where I live, made in China has always had this sort of stigma. It's always kind of been seen as like something to feel dirty about. And I don't know, maybe that's just where I live, but I feel like a lot of people have been sick of it for a very long time. And yet it continues because these corporations, you know, how are you going to fight that as an individual? Everything's made there, basically. In your part of the world, is made in China seen as a bad thing, or do people just not care?
I think people care to a point, but I think people aren't really checking what's made in China and what's not made in China. But to go back to the Nike point, what I think is really disgraceful here is that Nike claims not to care about human rights violations in China, obviously for their corporate reasons. But what's really disgraceful is that they've attacked our great ally Israel. For like, I think that whole thing just shows how silly and nonsensical the whole anti-BDS, like the whole BDS movement is.
Yeah.
That like they're willing to like kowtow to China, but like a great democratic ally of Israel that they want to attack, and that just really makes you think. But what I'm saying here is that companies like Nike, let's face it, these are. This is like they're not a friend of America in my opinion. I mean, obviously, I think they're employees. I understand they got to make a paycheck, but the high ups, they're definitely like the CEO. He's no friend of America and shouldn't be treated like America. Like right now, Nike is like the sponsor for our college, like for many college football teams, which are lo and behold government owned.
Yeah.
And I think for two reasons: one, there's the absolute love of China, and two, they violate BDS law by boycotting Israel. So I don't think Nike should be allowed to sponsor college football teams or college basketball teams anymore. That's government controlled. I mean, so I think that we need to crack down on Nike. They shouldn't have a role with government-owned stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that I've said on many occasions that I think that the national interest trumps any corporate interest. And I think in the case of Nike, there's a very good case to be made that if you were to, actually go after them, and especially given the statements of their executive, their chief executive, imagine an individual citizen behaved in this manner, it would basically in a way be tantamount to treason. Yet corporations can do treason and largely get away with it. I think one thing short of cutting off trade entirely would be to set up, a congressional hearing or whatnot, or the equivalents in Canada and the UK, to actually investigate companies and their behavior and their relationship with China to see just how close they are, just how beholden they are, and to see if they're ultimately acting to undermine the United States from within. Because, you know, you talk about sponsoring football and everything. Well, one thing that China's been doing recently is that they've been setting up these basically propaganda schools and universities and everything. They call them like Confucian schools or whatever. And I think that once these companies, you know, they get to a point of saturation in China where Nike already is, at some point, you know, are they going to be acting to undermine the US? Are they going to run subtle ads that are pro-communist? That sort of thing. I mean, you talked about the boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel. I think that that's one of those areas where they're ultimately acting in China's interest, not in America's interest. I mean, to undermine one of America's best allies in the world. I'm vehemently opposed to the BDS movement. The BDS movement is fundamentally anti-Semitic too. I had a debate yesterday about Israel, and the guy that I was debating said that Jews in theory can have their own country, but in practice he doesn't think that they should have a state. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, well, I said to him, I'm like, look, I don't think you're personally racist, but that is casual anti-Semitism. I think BDS is a systemic and it is a formal sort of anti-Semitism where it ultimately serves to deny the Jewish people a right to a state. And I would argue, you know, throughout history that out of all the peoples that there are, they probably deserve a state the most. They probably need a state the most for their own existence. And so I agree with you on that. I would say, though, that ultimately, I do think that all of these things that you've suggested would do a great deal to hurt China. That'd be a good thing. But I don't think that they alone would be enough to actually cripple the regime. I think that the regime would still survive. And I think that limiting is better than what we're doing now. But I think that the only way that we avoid a war is to just commit to it and say, no, you know, it's like North Korea. Nobody's doing business with them.
Yeah. So, like what you said is, when you said earlier, you said we could do cut off trade or do congressional hearings where we look into these companies. Either one would, you believe, wouldn't create a war with China. And I think the second idea is a much stronger and better idea, which is that we should have congressional investigation into these companies, because we truly need to know. If you're not we need to know, are you on our side or not here? And I think that would do a great deal as well. So I would support that. I don't think it's possible or doable to do the first one, but I think the second one, especially if we could get it phrased in such a way, and if there's enough national, but there's got to be a national movement, because guess where the senators get a lot of their donations from? Nike and other companies that use Chinese labor. But ultimately, the senators serve the people, not their corporate interests, such as Nike. So if enough people are willing to call their senator and say, this is what we want, I definitely think we could get an investigation into these companies through Congress, which is what I'd prefer to the complete trade cutoff. And I think that would be more doable and would be a better interest long term. And as for the military, I think we need to do more funding. We need to more ships. We need to, and I think
Yeah.
Do you know who House Rep Mike Waltz is?
Mike Waltz. You'd have to refresh my memory there. I'm sure I've heard the name before, but not right now.
He's a congressman. He was in DeSantis. He replaced DeSantis after DeSantis became governor of Florida. And he was arguing, and I completely agree with him here, we needed more funding for Navy in the NDAA, because if China's our main adversary right now, we need to combat their influence by building strengthening our Navy. And that's what I would love to see. I wish the NDAA had more Navy funding, and I'm glad Mike Waltz was able to raise that issue. So I would support increasing our military budget.
Based. Absolutely based. I think that increasing the military budget is something that, you talked about Reagan, right? Reagan spent 8% of American GDP on the military. Right now, Biden's spending 3.5%. And yet Reagan had China as an ally against the Soviets. We got China and Russia both as enemies. So I support increasing military spending in all NATO countries, but I think the U.S. is the one that's most important, to at least 8% of GDP. What do you think about 8%, more than doubling it, bringing it up to right now about 1.7 trillion roughly, what that would work out to in today's money? What do you think about that?
I'd have to see I'd have to see the exact budget numbers. I don't think I could give you an exact number off the top of my head. I don't know if I would go that high, but I think nowadays with the great technology we have, we can do less with more, or more with less. I mean, so what we can do is we can build things. We can build way more for way less, thanks to our technology boom and all that. I think we really need to look. I definitely think it needs to be increased. I couldn't give you an exact number, but as I said earlier, what I think is important is that we're spending it on the right stuff more than what exactly we're spending it on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, so like the Navy, there's got to be, if there's an 8% GDP, but nothing goes to the Navy, versus like 6% when we significantly increase our Navy budget. I much prefer the 6% where our Navy budget gets
yeah.
spent.
Yeah, most of what I would put it into would be submarines, more attack submarines, and other naval assets. I think the Navy is probably the most important thing. I think that in the situation of China, you talked about more for less, and I agree with that, except the problem is the same goes for them. So, for example, their long-range anti-aircraft missile, the PL-15 that they've got on, is I think it's the PL-15. It's better than anything that the U.S. fields right now. It's got a longer range than anything America has. And if you check out the channel Covert Cabal, or to anybody in the audience too, if you check out the channel Covert Cabal, he does a lot of open source intelligence review, goes over a lot of different military units and stuff in the world. He's talked about this before, that America, since the late Cold War, just kind of chillaxed with their anti-air technology. And so you're right that America, the technology is better than it was in the Cold War. But the problem is that China's really catching up. And in some specific areas like hypersonics and air-to-air combat, they're actually better. And that's a big worry, especially because they're putting a lot of their money now into their Navy. They, as you probably know, as of August, they've got the largest Navy in the world. And I think that should probably concern people more than it is right now. I think that, given this, I think it's pretty clear that a simple relying on, well, we can spend less, but we have better tech, won't necessarily work, because China's spending a lot and they're getting better tech. So one of the reasons why I would say, kick it up to 8% or more is to keep up with the fact that they've spent the last 30 years that America's been coasting, taking their military from a third world country to, America's cope about it is near peer, but ultimately in some areas more than peer. Some areas they have the supremacy. So I think that going to Cold War defense levels is the bare minimum in that regard. And that won't solve the problem in and of itself, but it gets a lot closer to putting the pressure on that regime, because if you double or more than double defense spending, they're going to have to kick up their defense spending anymore. And if you were to couple that with what you're suggesting, cutting them off in Africa, for example, that ultimately hurts their capacity to raise revenue. So, the ultimate goal that I think both of us would like to see is to bankrupt that regime, just like how the Soviet Union was bankrupted. I think so far we've had mostly agreement. I think our main disagreement has just been on the severity of the approach that we would put, and the speed at which we would put that in place. But is there anything else that you wanted to go over about China? Because so far, we're largely in alignment. I'm open to talk about other topics if there's nothing else that you wanted to add about China.
I would like to say one final thing, and then we can move on. I just
Sure.
want to say, I think it's good that people like. I think this debate is really good for a lot of people. I think it's good that we're talking about China policy and just in general. I think we need more Americans such as us to be way more concerned about this issue. You're from Canada, some more Americans, Canadian, Europeans to be concerned about China, and I think having these kind of conversations are good for the development of this country to become more aware of China and just have these conversations. I think that's been very important. So, what topic would you like to discuss next?
Yeah. So wonderful. So I think that was, like I said, we mostly agree, just disagree a little bit on the severity of the approach. But I agree with you that this conversation is definitely something that people need to be having a lot more. And the fact that, yeah, we can disagree about this, but look, you mentioned one thing earlier on, and when you were speaking, you talked about how, what's a more progressive thing to do than to stand in solidarity with people against this regime that's trying to put them into permanent debt. That is so based, because the thing is, what's funny about that, before we move on, is that a lot of people that would actually call themselves progressives, I don't call myself a progressive, but a lot of people that would call themselves that would regard the U.S. doing anything in Africa as imperialist. They would regard foreign aid as imperialism. And they would let all of that fall to China, basically. Do you consider yourself progressive?
I'm not like with them. Like, I consider myself progressive, but not like those types of progressives that are like woke and all that. But I would say genuinely, I genuinely view like we need to do more about human rights violations. Yes, I care about, like, in America, there's people who can't get health care. I know some, and I want everyone to be able to get health care in America, and I want, such as you have in Canada, some sort of like universal plan. I think there should still be a role for private somewhere, and I generally believe in like criminal justice reform for like people who are, drug users. I think more of an addiction based rehab versus an incarceration one's good. But on the other hand, what I'm not down for is defunding the police, which is going to lead to more crime. That's certainly not progressive. I'm not down for cutting military budget, which will lead to global atrocities happening. But so I'm down for like real progressive reform that helps the people worldwide, but I'm not down for whatever woke progressivism is, like cancel culture of like just that kind of stuff. No, I think that's like nonsensical and a waste of our time. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty damn based, I gotta say. I think that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think out of the people that I've debated, we've definitely got some pretty good common ground there. I think I love it. You talk about the military too there, and of course the police, right? If you defund the police, my whole thing about that is that I think it's a purposeful thing, that they know, that they actually agree with you, that the reason why they want to do it is so that police brutality will go up, because they'll have even less training, so that then they can say, hey, look, the cops are even worse, let's cut it even more. Because I don't think that their end goal is to defund the police. I think their end goal is to abolish it, but they realize they can't do it overnight, so they need to do it in baby steps of slowly taking away resources from the cops, so that the cops get worse and worse. That's kind of my view of it. So I agree, basically. I think before we move on to the next topic, though, I guess, what does the blue dog in your name mean? Like, so you're a Democrat, right? But would you say you're like a conservative Democrat, or what do you mean by blue dog?
That's a great question. So I used to be like a Democrat, like a blue dog Democrat. I was always a pro-life Democrat, so I like the blue dog Democrat. But I've kind of after Biden left Afghanistan, I became disenfranchised with the Democratic Party. Briefly moved to the Republicans, but I'm like, I don't really like. So I consider myself a patriotic independent. I genuinely want what's best, whether it's from the left or the right, and I think, like, I like certain like Democrats such as Vincent Gonzalez, and I like Republicans such as Mike Waltz and Don Bacon. So I think what I like, I get some people say, well, bipartisanship can't happen, anymore, and I think it's more difficult in this era, certainly. But I think what's important is we we can work at least on the big stuff. Love of country, love of just love of basic freedoms and rights, and that's what I want out of this country. Is that we're a country where I dream of a country where somebody who has like a MAGA hat, very pro Trump, can be best friends with like a hardcore progressive, and we can all get along at least on a personal level. And then politics were obviously going to differ, but I'd love more conversations like what we had instead of, like the whole the election's stolen, and that's kind of like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I think I'm just gonna move. Yeah, there it is, just to center you a little bit there. Yeah. Okay. I think that a little bit of devil's advocate there. I think that vision to some extent has actually already been realized, but not in the way that you intended or I would want it, which is that Tucker Carlson, who is a mega hat wearing dude, is, well received by a big progressive like shoe on head, right? Like there's the whole Nazbol vortex of these progressives and stuff and other sort of like more socialist figures that they kind of like the Trump thing now, to kind of own the establishment or whatever as they see it. So I guess I would push back a little on that, in that a lot of Republicans are really cool. I like Bill Kristol, I like David Brooks, but a lot of the mega types, I don't know if I can see them as being worth reaching out to, I don't know. I think a lot of them are good people that got suckered into it, but I think there's a big percentage of them where a lot of them are just vicious racists and to some extent fascists. So what do you think about that? Well,
I think this is going to be our first kind of bigger disagreement here. I think that, I know I'm friends with people who I think have terrible, terrible views on certain issues. I know people who support, unfortunately, the BDS movement, which I strongly disagree with, and I support hardcore. I have friends who are hardcore MAGA, but what I think's important is when, obviously, we gotta, on a personal level, when they're wrong on policy, being terrible on policy doesn't make you a terrible person. What we do care about, I think we need to focus on more of the things that we do agree on. We want our kids to be able to get a good education. We want our families to do well, and we want what's generally what we think is best. We disagree, and I get that, but I think I've talked to so many people who have so many different views, and I think we need to advocate. Never surrender your views. Never give up on what you truly believe in. But also try and build friendships with people who are different. I guarantee you, if you talk to somebody who's like a hardcore MAGA type, you might not like exactly what they say at first, but when you talk to them more on like a non-political level, you might become best friends with one of them.
Okay. I know we hadn't talked about this. There were other topics that I'd like to debate you on, but I do got to ask you about this, though, which is, obviously the anniversary of January 6th happened recently. What do you make of a big percentage of Republicans? At one point, I think I saw 70% supported the insurrection. Like, as far as I see it, look, if you were making these talking points to me back when Mitt Romney was the nominee back in 2012 or even like 2013, I'd 100% agree with that. I think the Republican Party in 2013 was better than the Democratic Party in 2013. No question, in my view at least. But I say the Republican Party of the Trump era and now in the Cope era as just, it's basically 30% reasonable, moderate people that you could actually have a decent conversation with, and they would fit the type of personality that you're describing. And then it's 70% of people that they basically want to burn your country down and do a putsch basically and install Trump as their God emperor for life. So I I don't know. I really don't. I don't agree with that with the MAGA crowd. It's not all Republicans, but I think it's the specific Trump wing is an exception. Like I've been really in recent days struggling to think of an analogy. I think the only president that comes close is like Andrew Jackson. I really think that Trump is that bad. I can't think of any other, like even Richard Nixon was nowhere near as bad as Trump is. And so I can't think of any sort of modern or contemporary parallels to what's happened to the Republican Party. All that I can go back to is like the Andrew Jackson sort of thing, you know? So what do you think of the Republicans today as there's a huge percentage, not an overwhelming majority, but at least a definite majority that are batshit crazy? Yeah.
Well, here's a good point. So first off, I think the good news is the Senate's always been in America the greatest deliberative body. It's more serious than the House. And if you look at the senators, at the end of the day, 7 objected, and 93 did not. And that's a pretty strong majority in favor of the absolutely correct outcome here, which is Biden won. I understand not liking that your guy lost, but let's face it, he lost. And even if you let's look at Rick Scott. Let's look at Cynthia Lummis really quick. They objected. It was obviously a bad vote, especially after the Capitol attack, because to me their vote was more in protest, and a protest after an event that horrific to me is in poor taste. But if you look at their statements, Rick Scott's acknowledged that Biden won fair and square, and Lummis has said she never intended to overturn the election. So even some of the objectors don't believe the election fraud nonsense. Unfortunately, Ted Cruz, who likes to talk like a big game on China and Hong Kong, who voted against the very important refugees bill, he's the single one who killed it, doesn't even care about democracy here apparently, because he just last night on Tucker Carlson he was talking about election fraud, which is unfortunately tearing this country apart. Now on to the voters who believe election fraud. I believe they're extremely misguided. I don't think they're bad people. I think they're extremely misguided. And you can absolutely be friends with them. That being said, there's certain people you don't maybe want to, manage your money or do certain important things. And I don't want the people who believe election fraud running my country. That's just that simple. Can I be friends with them? Can I go to a ball game with them? I don't like their politics, and I think they're absolutely nuts. But at the end of the day, I can be friends with them. It's just, but I think there's certain things like I don't want them running my country. But could I go to a ball game with them? Could I even date and marry one of them? Well, it depends how crazy they are. But I could definitely be friends with them and do certain and be friendly. And I think,
yeah,
and hopefully I could use my friendship to kind of, talk them out of the election fraud thing. And I think once you do it in a way that's more palatable, I think they could, at least some of them can start to see it. But I think you can be friends with somebody with saying, do I really want them to run my country? No, but like I can still absolutely be friends with them. There's a lot of people I'm friends with that I'm like, no, I don't want them running my country. But they're a cool person to see the ball game with, and that's what we need more in this country.
Okay. Yeah, to start with, the point about Rick Scott and Ted Cruz, those guys are smart. They know what they're doing, and they know how to rile up a base. I wouldn't say that they personally believe any of that bullshit personally. I think, I'm somebody who, I like the ball work. I watch the ball work every week. I like Bill Kristol. I like Sykes and those guys. The problem is they're a pretty small minority in the Republican Party right now. When you watch Tucker or One American News Network or any of these crazy outlets and stuff, they actually represent a fairly large segment of people these days, which is a new thing. Fox News used to be pretty serious, and now they're basically a joke because of Trump. And I think that, that electorate that they're appealing to, that they are riling up, I think they're driving them under a spell. And I think that a lot of these people live in a different world. They live in a world of, as Kellyanne Conway said, alternative facts. I think that for them, the sky is green, and QAnon's gonna, some of them, QAnon's gonna bring the storm and all this type of stuff, and there's this secret cabal running everything, and deep state and all that. They live in a parallel universe. Could you go to a ball game with them? Sure. Could you date them? Sure. But to normalize their politics, though, is what I've got a problem with. And I don't think that their politics should be normalized, and I don't think that their politics should be in any way legitimized. And I think that that's probably a bit of a disagreement, is that you might say, well, there's a lot of them, and I would agree with that. But the problem is, that's a massive problem. And this is a new thing in the United States. This is a new thing. I think it's, I think it's, well, I will say this very briefly. Spamming like this guy's doing in the chat right now does get you a timeout, just a heads up. So you will get a timeout, and if you proceed with that, you will get banned. So just a heads up. So getting back to the conversation, I don't want to let that derail the conversation. I think that it's very clear here that that to normalize their politics and to act like, oh, this is just like any other political era. Republicans disagree, Democrats disagree with each other. No, I think there's something different now. I think, not just January 6th, but that really was when this came to a head, that there's a large percent in the Republican Party that would be cool and even welcome and cheer on the end of American democracy and the beginning of a fascist dictatorship, as long as their guy is at the helm of that. And I don't think that those people should be normalized. I don't think that they should be engaged with. In theory, yeah, you can date them or go to a ball game with them. But if I knew their views, would I do that? No, I wouldn't, because I don't befriend fascists. So that's where I'm at. So what would be your retort to that?
Oh, well, obviously it's both America and Canada. They're free countries. You can do whatever you want to, and that's what makes us free and a great country. But my larger point here is that the people who believe, like, first of all, I don't think these policies should be normalized, and I think we need to do more at the federal level, and I think we really got to watch those Secretary of State races and Attorney General races to see, well, are they running on the big lie, or are they running a normal campaign? And it's unfortunate there's I think a lot of people get sour grapes when the candidate loses. I'm sure there's a decent amount of Democrats too on the other side. Couldn't give you a number who would happily have installed Biden or Hillary as dictator if it meant no more Trump. But I think it would still be less than the Republicans. But my point here is that the reason I would go to a ball game here is this. I don't blame, like, to me, they're kind of victims in this whole thing, partly. They've been fed lies by people who know better. And, I think part of the thing is that being a friend to these people will help them see the true, like, we'll make them see Biden voters in a better light. Like, see us as truly people who want to work with the other side, and not as people who are just like these evil, like, obviously QAnon's a step too far, and that's where you're just deranged. Like, if it's not going to be enjoyable. But I think if you're an election fraud believer, I genuinely just think you're misguided, and I understand we're not going to agree, and I don't want you or your policies anywhere near running my country.
Okay.
But, like, no. Like, if you're an election fraud believer, I don't want you in the House of Representatives. I don't want you in the Congress. I don't want your policies getting anywhere near normalized. Let's say I'm a Chicago Bears fan. Let's say you're a Bears fan. You believe election fraud, but you let's say we like football and we like that kind of stuff. I'd go to the game with you, have a Dr. Pepper, have something to drink, and hopefully, we can build a fun. Like, I think friendships and politics should be two different things. I think I think if you talk to an election fraud believer, I think if you dug deep down into it, they're not bad. They're just very misguided, and I think it's tough because their views are detrimental. If they
Okay.
get implemented, they're definitely detrimental. But if you shun these people away, they're just gonna get more connected to the disreality, which is QAnon, 4chan, all this nonsense. Whereas going to a ball game, taking a walk, watching some TV, watching some good old just reality trashy television, all that kind of stuff. That's part of the real America that isn't like that is connected to reality, and it's something that we all can agree on. We like Tom Brady debates, stuff like that. That's part of building a national cohesion. And instead of them going on to QAnon, they're not going on whatever the QAnon 4chan websites, and they're hanging out with me, watching a ball game, talking about the ball game, getting to be part of normal society. A lot of QAnon was created when people were locked away in the pandemic, nothing better to do, going online, finding these weird articles, and just believing all types of nonsense and conspiracy theories. And so I think being friends with people who are, I think, victims in a lot of cases of lies and getting hooked onto like One American News, White Side Broadcasting, even Fox for all the main slot from like Tucker. I think Hannity's significantly better than the others. Ingram, Gutfeld's just kind of odd. He's funny sometimes, but like, and then you got Shannon. Like Shannon's fine, and then you got like the daytime Fox, which is legitimate news. But I think you just got to get these people back into regular society, watching a ball game, going on a walk. Just typical stuff that used to be very important to our American identity and Canadian identity as well. Like, don't you think it's better to have like these people try and get back to reality instead of just going more on 4chan, deeper into the rabbit hole?
No, I think this is probably one of the most interesting debates I've done on this channel in a while then, because I do disagree with you, but I see where you're coming from. I don't think you're like a fascist apologist or anything like that sort of stuff, even though I described a lot of these people as fascist. I think though that where you're coming from, and this is my view of it, and it is a good debate, and I'm open to reconsidering my views on this, because it's not I'm a foreign policy guy for the most part, so I don't spend that much time on this type of stuff. But I do see your approach is naive, and I'll explain why, and I'll let you retort to that. But my view of it basically is that another way of looking at this would be, well, if we were to do what you're doing, your meaning is, your purpose is, just hang out and hopefully they become normal. I get that, right? If that worked, then I would agree with you. But my cynical view of this is that what's more likely to happen is that they're still going to go about their day and their life living in this sort of cult and getting more and more radicalized. But now they don't have to worry about the cost of losing any of their friends or their dating options. And so for me, I look at that and I say, what's a better world? A world where they have to choose between the cult and their friends? Because some that aren't that deep into it would choose their friends over the cult. Or a world in which you can be in the cult, you can be in the crazy people that want to take over and end democracy, but you don't have to worry about people not wanting to date you. You don't have to worry about people not wanting to hang out with you. I think it's better to put a social cost on them to be in it than to not have that social cost to hope that they leave it. Now that's my view, and I'll close my sort of reasoning here by saying that, you mentioned how, to you at least, that QAnon would be too far, but I am curious, and this is kind of the second part of this, so you can answer these in two parts, but as to where the line is, because the logic that you said about how a lot of them are just good people that got, sucked into this, I would agree with that. But so were a lot of the people that lived in Germany in the 20s and then got suckered into the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And in 1936, 1937, they were big fans of Hitler. And they were like, yeah, he loves the country and he loves his dog and everything. They weren't like necessarily rabid anti-Semites. Not everybody that voted for Hitler was actually anti-Semitic. A lot of them were gullible. A lot of them thought, oh, he's going to build roads and stuff. And guess what? The consequences of what that led to when they actually got power was, mass destruction. And so what I see, I'm not necessarily saying they're on the same scale, but imagine that January 6th had succeeded. Then it would be on a similar scale. You would have a dictatorship. And so I think where is the line? So I think my guess is you'd probably have a problem hanging out with a guy in 1937 that voted for Hitler or supported Hitler, but you're okay with hanging out with a guy that supports the election fraud, supports the election fraud narrative, supports the January 6th stuff. You just don't want them running the country. But I guess my question basically there is just, where's the line, and why is your approach not naive?
Okay. Yeah, well, I'd say the people who even probably the worst of the election fraud believers in QAnon are still a million times better than Adolf Hitler. But what I would say here is that I hear we're not going to win out. So sure, there would be some cases where your thing would work and they would choose their friends over the QAnon cult. And I think there's a big difference, though, between someone who believes election fraud but supports the January 6th rioters. I think there's some people who believe, well, Trump being in would make our country better, so that's okay. They're completely wrong. And I think they're very just misguided, and I think that, well, okay, can I ask you this question?
Yep.
If, let's say Trump would have, because you're very passionate, you think Afghanistan, and I agree with you too, that leaving Afghanistan was a bad decision.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So I agree with you that I know you're very passionate about Afghanistan and we should never have left.
Yeah.
And I actually agree with you. I don't think we should have left. I think it was a mistake.
Yeah.
So my question is, let's say if somehow overturning the election and Trump would have stayed in, but he would have kept us in Afghanistan, would that have been worth it to you?
Yeah, so, okay, well, that's an interesting question. So I've said on previous streams on Superpower Broadcasting back when we streamed live on YouTube, and those are available now as of the last few weeks, because I won my copyright battle with the fascists that took my channel down for 89 days. I've said on a few of those streams that, look, if Trump ran in 2024 on going back into Afghanistan, I'd support him over Biden, even though he was the one that wanted to leave initially, because I care more about the consequence than who started or whatever. I care about the outcome and I care about the actions. Now, that's in an election, right? And I'm saying if Joe Biden and Trump ran in 2024, but if you say America becomes a dictatorship but it stays in Afghanistan, or America stays a democracy but leaves Afghanistan, at that point, if America's a dictatorship can't nation build into a democracy. Like the Soviet Union was a dictatorship and they invaded Afghanistan and I was against it. So at that point, if that happened, not only would I not support Trump, I would be aligning with like the UK on Australia and stuff to liberate the United States, what was left of the United States. I would actually support, at that point, a war of liberation against the United States to get rid of their dictator. So in that example, we got bigger fish to fry than Afghanistan at that point. Now it's like, oh, we need to go to war with the United States to get this dictator out of power and liberate the people. That's where I'd be at. I'd actually be calling for regime change in America at that point if Trump was a dictator and the election was overturned. So that's where I'm at.
I respect that very much. My point is, I think some people see Biden. My merit here isn't to judge their policy. They're absolutely insane that Biden's like going to destroy the country. It was an insane narrative. But people believe, like, if people believe that, like, they're like, well, putting Trump in as dictator will make things so much better. They're completely wrong, but I think their view is like, well, we have to do everything we can to save America. They're completely wrong. And I think what we need to do is we need to combat that disinformation. And you know what I would like to see to combat this instead? I would like to see a law that makes it illegal for politicians or people in government offices to claim without evidence that, or to claim without just to willy-nilly claim that an election was stolen. As a politician, you have a higher standard to me than a regular citizen. Steve, the guy who lives down the street who has no power, he's an idiot if he believes the election was stolen, but I think it's free speech and he can believe in that. Whereas Joe, the politician who runs the country, to me, he can't just be spouting on nonsensical election lies. So I think the burden is on the politicians than more on the guy who's not in power, who just believes some really stupid thing that's at the fault of his politician, actually. So my point is, I think these people have bad views on, and some of them genuinely, like, they don't think most of them probably don't think they're, like, fascist. They think, well, Trump legitimately won. They've been convinced that Trump legitimately won. He didn't. So what would you do if you thought, let's say you thought an election was stolen?
Okay, so there's a few things to dissect there. So on the point about elected officials claiming that an election was stolen without having evidence, okay, this is a hot take. I agree with you. I think that's absolutely unbelievably based, and it's something that I haven't heard. I haven't heard in Twitch circles, even progressive Twitch circles. I haven't heard that. I haven't heard a lot of these people talking about and making fun of Trump supporters and making fun of all this stuff. I haven't even heard that proposed by people who have no issue with not being liked by Republicans. They don't care what Republicans think of them. I haven't even heard that proposed there. I think that's pretty original. I think it's pretty creative. I like it. The only counter would be that they would argue that that's a violation of their First Amendment rights as citizens. Now, I'm not like a First Amendment supreme type guy. I actually like generally what we've got in Canada. And I think that Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom have a much better understanding of the social contract as it relates to the role of the citizen and the role of society in relation to society than the United States does. I think that the United States social contract, as it's laid out, lends itself to civil war, lends itself to chaos, that sort of stuff. And I think that at the end of the day, you would have to amend the Constitution in order to do it. I would support that, though. I don't think it could happen, but I think it would be great. I think it would be great to amend the First Amendment to say, look, elected officials are in a position, kind of like how if you join the military, you actually give up a little bit of your First Amendment rights. You're not allowed to, go around telling the commander-in-chief that he's full of shit and all that type of stuff. If you're in the military, if you're a civilian, you can, but if you're in the military, you have to hold your tongue. Likewise, I would say, well, amend that to include politicians. I don't see that as unreasonable because you can decide not to be a politician and then you can be free to say whatever you want. That would be kind of my understanding of that. I think it's good. I think a lot of people call you a communist or whatever for proposing that. I think it's good. I think it's a hot take, but I think it's based. I think you're living up to your name there. I appreciate that. I appreciate original ideas a lot, and I like that. But I think going back to kind of what you were saying about how, these people believe that it was stolen and they don't think of themselves as fascists. They don't necessarily think of Trump as a fascist or anything. They just, they see this as the best way to make their country great again and to put things right in their country. The problem with that is Hitler didn't come in and just tell everybody, obey me or I kill you. He came in and a huge number of Germans loved it. And they were like, yes, he's going to make Germany great again. But they weren't rabid racists. They weren't, fascists. They were just people who didn't think that much about politics. They see this dude with a fashionable mustache and swaggy uniforms designed by Hugo Boss, and they're like, oh, and he's got a nice car, and he's talking about building roads, and he's talking about taking back land that we lost in Versailles, and he's talking about, addressing the financial crisis, all this stuff. And guess what? A lot of those people, yeah, they had families and everything, and they loved their country and whatnot. I think the only difference between them and the Trump supporters is that the Trump supporters were born in America in probably most of them the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And those guys were born in Germany in probably the 1890s through the 1910s. I think that's the only difference. I really think that's the only difference. Now, you can say, of course, Hitler is way worse than Trump, and I would agree with that. But it's the same thing. It's people that thought of themselves as patriots that want to make their country great again. And they fell for the big lie. And I that's why I say you actually have to put a cost on their behavior. And will a lot of them say, okay, we're going to be insular and whatever, and we're just going to lose our friends over that? Sure. But I think a lot of the people would choose their friends and choose their partners over the fascism. And to the people that decide that they're going to go down with Trump, it'll be a smaller number of people, and they'll have a less likely chance of succeeding in that, as opposed to now. I mean, you talked about how there is a difference between those that believe the voter fraud lie and those that support January 6th. But based on the polling that I saw, at least, is about 70% on both. It was almost 100% of those that thought it was stolen supported January 6th insurrection. So as far as I'm concerned, those people are a write-off. Like, they're gone, and that's where I'm at. But that doesn't mean all Republicans are bad. That means that there's about 30% of Republicans that are great, upstanding people. And there's 70% of them that are batshit insane that were normal people 5 or 6 years ago, And it was fast how far they got sucked down. Like, it was a fast thing. And a lot of those people that found themselves being fans of Hitler in 1937 were regular, average, normal people in 1931. Things happen fast, right?
Well, I don't see anything like Germany happening. I'm confident that nothing like Germany will happen in America. And I think, we had a really big scale here. And at the end of the day, I would say the only senators who truly pushed the big lie to the level of we're overturning the election, like actually attempted to commit fascism, was Cruz, Hawley, Tuberville, and what's his name? The guy from Marshall and Kennedy. So there's really only 5 to me that were really trying to overturn the election. A lot were just trying to make us in a poor taste protest vote to object to the election. So I think our institutions will stand. Our courts, look at the great job our courts did throughout the whole election. Even like Alito and Thomas weren't willing to overturn the election. And they're about as far right as you can get for a Supreme Court justice. So...
Right. Well, those guys, in fairness to Alito and Thomas, though, they weren't the Trump appointments. They were an older school brand of Republicanism where you can disagree with them, but they're normal people. They're not batshit the way that the Trump era the Trump era has produced a new, very young generation of conservatives that they have more in common. Like, unironically, they have more in common with Francisco Franco and Augusto Pinochet than they do with Ronald Reagan or Eisenhower. Like, seriously, you actually grill them on their views. No, a lot of these guys are like straight up actual fascists. They don't believe in democracy. They only believe in democracy as a tool to serve them. They only believe in free speech as a tool to serve them. And sometimes they'll admit it. Richard Spencer is a great example of this. What did he say? He said, oh yeah, well, we just talk about free speech so that we can get sympathy. But once we get power, we're silencing anybody who disagrees with us. That they actually admit that. They're pretty mask off about it. So Alito and Thomas, they're an older brand now. They're an older brand of Republicans that are normal people, so that you could go to a ball game with. So.
Yeah, but the Trump appointees, I would say, also stood strong on the election fraud stuff. Barrett, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh, yeah.
they all stood strong, in my opinion, on the election stuff. They all ruled against it. Actually, Alito and Thomas had more the vote, like, we'll review it, but they never were going to actually overturn it. But my point is, you said earlier you would vote for Trump in 2024 if he promised to go back to Afghanistan. But then wouldn't you be like, he would have potential Supreme Court justices, and he's not happy with the ones he picked because they didn't overturn the election.
Yeah.
Now he might appoint like Hannity to the Supreme Court, who would try and overturn the election, and he'd appoint people who would be more anti-democratic.
Yeah, just for the record here, with everything that's happened, I do think that does change things. I think that it's a little bit different now. I think that the attempt at overturning the election definitely makes a difference in this, and it's something to consider. And I think, if I really had to decide on that, if it's Trump, it's so tough, because I've also argued that Joe Biden should be impeached for betraying the trust of American partners on the ground and compromising American national security for future operations where nobody on the ground is going to trust to work with America, because, well, if America decides to pull out, then they're gone. So the problem that I have with Biden is significant, but I think the problem that I have with Trump is probably bigger than that. And I think he's an exception. Any other Republican would be different, but I think Trump, it's unconscionable to support him at this point. I think that he represents a different streak that you haven't seen before in the Republican Party. It has nothing. It's like a 180 separation from Mitt Romney in 2012. They're different parties, basically, from when Romney was in charge, and they hate each other too. Trump's made fun of Romney. Romney doesn't like Trump. I think that as far as this situation goes, at the end of the day, now with Trump specifically, I'd still have to go with Biden. But it pisses me off so much because Reese and I both supported Biden when he was running. We thought that he would trust the generals and stay in Afghanistan. And he was talking about how he was going to be different than Trump, and he wasn't going to be based on emotion and these alternate facts and all this type of stuff. He was actually going to be based on reason and expertise and having a sober look at things. And yet he decided that he was going to keep Trump surrender to the Taliban. And that was unconscionable to me. I think Trump versus Biden 2024 is an absolute, like, the worst lineup you could possibly have in an election. I'm trying to think right now. I can't think of any election in American history where you'd have two worse candidates, personally. I can't think of any of them, because as much as I had disagreements with what's his name? Like, I got disagreements with Carter and disagreements with Reagan, disagreements with a lot of different people. I think Trump and Biden are two people that are so deplorable that it really does at that point become that South Park meme of a turd sandwich basically running for president versus whatever the hell else foul. I forget the other one, but basically two very foul choices. At that point, though, you still have to take the one that didn't try to overthrow American democracy. I think my big issue with kind of the logic of what you're getting at is that even though the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in the rational side of things here, you talk about how, well, it was only 6 senators. But the problem with that is, if we say, well, it was only 6, what happens if it was 14? That still wouldn't have made a difference, right? What if it was 26? What if it was 38? Still wouldn't make a difference. But what if now it was 48? Well, now we'd still have a democracy in America, but it would be very narrow. So I guess my question for you is, how many senators would it take for you to change this? What if it was 32? Would you still be saying the same thing, or would you be saying, okay, now this is a threat to democracy? That was close. What would you say?
Well, I think that's the thing. I always look at, like, I try and follow as many votes as I can, and I always look, even at that 99-1, okay, what are you doing here? Why did you vote no on this? And I think it's concerning. Like, I see like the Afghan resettlement vote failed. Oh, it succeeded heavily, like 400 and something to like 6. But it's very concerning to see Boba. I think the squad voted against one of those
Yeah.
bills. What I'm saying is one vote's concerning.
Okay.
But my belief is, how do you handle this? And the truth is, what I think needs to happen, what I think is a great strategy here is, and I'm calling on this, Democrats, if you live in a safe red state, vote in the Republican primary for the guy who's not going to overturn democracy. So, vote. There's so many races. Like look, you got Senator Thune, and he's up in South Dakota, and there's probably going to be some big liar running against him. I urge Democrats to support his reelection in the primary, so we can weaken the radicals and the crazies on both sides. And I'd also like what we need more get out the vote. Like, we need a Democrats vote in a red state isn't going to matter too much. We need a Democratic. We need the Democrats to come out and just say we're going to vote in Republican primaries in safe red states that are going to have candidates that actually support democracy. And I think that's a good strategy. So
well, I got a little bit of pushback there, though, which is that, I guess, how would you galvanize that sense of urgency? Because that's really hard to do, to organize that level of political engagement with people that live in, say you're a Democrat in a red state, a significant red state. That's pretty hard to get people engaged. If you're saying, well, go to a ball game with the MAGA guys and be friends and date the MAGA guys and treat them like normal people, it almost seems like you're going against that that campaign then, because you're deflating the sense of urgency. Because if everybody feels, well, these people are just like me, Trump's just like me, these guys that I go to a ball game with, they're fine with overturning democracy, they're just like me. How are you going to then galvanize them to go in way bigger numbers than normal to vote in primaries? You actually, here's what you'd actually have to do that. You'd have to overstate the threat of Trump. You'd have to say something like, we almost lost democracy. It wasn't 6. You'd have to be like, it was super narrow. He almost made himself a dictator. You actually have to fearmonger to get people to go out. What you're suggesting of normalizing relations with these people would actually make less Democrats feel passionate and scared enough to go out and vote. That's my criticism there.
Well, I say we normalize them as individuals and denormalize their policies that are such as the election fraud. And I think we can do this, and I don't think it takes any exaggeration or anything. I think people can be very common. Like, I would love maybe somebody like one of those like somebody like Bill Kristol could maybe run this organization. And what it does is it gets the Democrats to get out and vote in primaries for Republican primaries and tell them, look, you probably don't like John Thune. You have significant policy disagreements with him. For example, a lot of people, I don't think John Thune is at any risk of losing the primaries. He's very safe. But, imagine what 2,000 votes could do in a South Dakota Senate primary for John Thune. It would probably help him pretty significantly. And I would love this effort by Bill Kristol, who has conservative cred, at least somewhat, but also has very good relationships with Democrats. I would love to see someone like Bill Kristol lead this effort of getting Democrats out to get activists out to say, hey, you might not like Thune, but look, on January 6th, he stood up for what was right. He's a guy you might not agree with on a lot. I think he did vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I agree with. But I think at the end of the day, getting candidates in there that aren't, at least, like Thune tells the truth. He said today when Crapo said, The election was fair. It was free. What happened was, Senator Thune said, "Welcome to the club." Like, Thune has been very truthful on this election matter, called out Trump's lies. And I think even if we could get 2,000 Democrats to go vote in the Republican primary in South Dakota, it makes Thune that much safer. Like, it's already very likely he'd win, but like 2,000 more votes, you know what, that could do significantly more for him.
Okay. So I guess, do you keep up with Bill Kristol much, or watch the Bulwark, or read the Bulwark very much?
I keep track of his accounts, see what he has to say. I respect him very much. I think I like him. I think he's gone too, like, he's too in with the Democratic Party, because I think he should be sticking with the Democratic. Shouldn't necessarily be siding, because he's not a Democrat, and I think we need Republicans like him. But I respect him on policy very much.
Okay, because Bill Kristol, and especially the other people over at the Bulwark, when they talk about the Trump crowd, when they talk about MAGA, they don't talk about it the way that you've been talking about. How about these are guys that you can have a drink with and they're normal people. They talk about them as a cult. They talk about them as crazies. I mean, you watch the Bulwark, you look at the way that they talk about Ted Cruz, you look at the way that they talk about any of these people. If he's going to do that, he's going to be saying specifically, hey, look, this Trump crowd, they're different. They're off their rocker. They're freaking insane. And this is a threat to democracy. He's not going to be saying, oh, they're normal people. They're just like us. Because Bill Kristol, he's smart and he's down to earth, and he sees how these people feel about him, how these people feel about the Republican Party before Trump, and he recognizes they're a different party. They have very little in common with the party of George Bush and John McCain and Mitt Romney. They, as I said, they have far more in common with Franco, Pinochet, and Suharto than they do with Bush, McCain, or Reagan. They're just they're a different party. They're fucking insane. And so in order to get people to go out and do that sort of campaign, you'd really have to go with Bill Kristol's sort of messaging. You have to go with my sort of messaging. Your sort of messaging about how, well, they're normal people, but their politics are crazy. That's going to undermine your cause, because at the end of the day, and maybe we'll disagree about this, most people suck at nuance. Most people like and operate in a black and white world, good guys and bad guys. And you've got good guys, and you're on the good side, and you got your bad guys, and you wanna fight against the bad guys. Most people don't really operate in, well, my friend's a bad guy, but he's also kind of a good guy. That's not really how people like to live, and it doesn't really work well in political messaging. And so I don't think it would work, because human nature is black and white, and people like to think of their team as the good guys and the other team as the bad guys. And so in this case, it's literally true. It's not even just like a sports sort of thing. It's that these guys tried to overturn American democracy. 70% supported the end of democracy in America. And I don't think those people deserve to go to a ball game with you. So it's really that simple. It's kind of my view of it. I just think that I think that you'd have to rework human nature in order for this to work. And at that point, well, if we can just alter human nature, then I guess we could get communism to work or something at that point,
So what I'm saying is, absolutely, Ted Cruz is 100%, at least somewhat, a danger to democracy. I think he would have I'm confident if he had the individual ability, he would have overturned 2020 to Trump. He is somebody who is, well, he's not deranged. He knows what he's doing. He's the problem. Cruz is the problem. Not Joe, the QAnon believer, who's been duped into this. I mean, we've got to help him and show compassion to him, and see the error of his way and try and at least relate to him. He's been duped, and I feel bad for Joe, and that's why I believe it's really on the politicians who spread these lies, such as Cruz. And I think it's absolutely okay to call Cruz and say Cruz is blatantly the bad guy in this. He blatantly is attacking democracy.
Okay, but Cruz would not be in that office anymore if it wasn't for thousands, tens of thousands of people like the Joe that you're describing. So I would actually say that Joe is a bad guy and scaled up. They're the people that keep these people in power now. So you can say, well, Trump and those guys created the monster, but the monster now votes in the guys that created it. And so it's a symbiotic relationship. It's a positive feedback loop. And I think that they're both complicit in the big lie. The people and the leaders are both complicit in the big lie. Just as in Germany, it wasn't like all those Hitler fans thought it was BS. They were complicit and parroted the big lie. And so were they good people? Were they normal people? They used to be normal. A lot of them used to be good people. And then things changed. And at a certain point, there's a line that's crossed where people, they go too far. And so I guess I would have to ask you then, I don't believe that being friendly to them is going to bring them back. I think what's more likely to happen is they use you as their friend and they continue in their ways and you just got taken for a fool. So my question to you, very specifically, not to Cruz, not to any of the leaders, but to Joe Schmo down the street that thinks that January 6th was for freedom, that dude, how do you bring him back?
How do you bring him back to reality?
Yeah.
Well, it's I think that's the most difficult. I don't think ostracizing him is going to bring him back. Well, I think again, somebody who's like there's a significant amount of election fraud people. I know some who think January 6th was wrong.
Okay.
That shouldn't have happened.
Well, I just want to be very clear. I'm not saying that ostracizing them will bring them back. I guess what I'm more getting at is you contain the disease. You say these people are a write-off. They're going to be crazy. They're going to get more crazy, but we're going to cut them off at, say, 30% of the population, as opposed to letting them hang out and infect more and more people where they become 35% and then 40% of the population eventually reach a critical mass. I'm saying isolate and ostracize that 70% of Republicans and, go forth and don't look back. Like, cast them into the abyss. They're done. Basically, they are not a part of normal society anymore. And guess what? They alone are not enough to do it at that point. The disease then is contained. But I feel that with your sort of strategy here of being nice to them allows the disease more host to propagate in. Because what if it's not you? What if it's somebody else that has a similar ideology to you, not crazy, hangs out with these guys, and now all of a sudden they become hashtag stolen vote or whatever, QAnon believer, right? Like, what if it goes the other way? What if it goes, you try to be normal and nice to them and they turn you, right? I'm not saying you personally, but in this dynamic, because they're convinced on their beliefs. What if you're not equally as convinced? What if they sow doubt? What if they slowly change you over a few years? It can happen, right?
I do think I do agree that could happen. And Prime
just rated us with 123 viewers. Thank you to Prime for rating this show right now. Prime is a very, very dedicated Twitch streamer to everybody who's watching right now before the raid. So definitely go and check out Prime. He does panel debates, various different topics, some, more intensely political than others. He's always cool. He says here, my man, Superpower Broadcasting, just had to support as always. Oh yeah, and it's mutual. I support his content and everything too. So thank you for the raid, Prime guys. He's based. Seriously, go and check him out. I mean, we got our disagreements, right? The thing is, he's hosted debates, and with people in his community and myself, people in our community. And I like that. I like that. I like that that he's willing to engage with different ideas, and he's willing to engage in debate. And I think, to base Blue Dog here, I think that that's one thing that in general, we could probably both agree that, having debates and stuff is pretty good. And by the way, on the whole MAGA thing, I'm open to debating them. I just don't necessarily want to be friends with the MAGA crowd. But I think debates are kind of the only appropriate way to kind of do this, you know? But I'll let you get back to what you were saying, but we just got a big raid there, so.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So what I'm saying is about the MAGA people. So ultimately, I think if you support January 6th as noble, yeah, I think you need serious help at that point. Like it was not noble. It was bad, and I'm gonna call you on that. You believe in election fraud, but you think January 6th was bad. I think that's a different ballgame. I think what you need to do with them is that I think you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And I think as many people who will be flipped to the bad way will be flipped to our way, which is the election wasn't stolen. So yes, you might lose some to the crazies, but some crazies will come back to reality.
Okay.
I've already...
No, that's a good answer. I think I'd still disagree with that. I think that they turn more of us than we would turn of them because they're so fixed in their ways. People that tend to be in a cult like that tend to be really solidified in their views and really hard to change. Whereas average normal people, we don't have all the answers, We're like, that's the thing about the QAnon crowd. That's the thing about that type of crowd is that they have the answers for everything. Like even these problems that a lot of us would really struggle to answer, they just say, "Oh, the deep state did it. They're the reason for this. The elites, that's what it offers them. These types of cults offer them security. They offer them an explanation, a very basic and stupid explanation for the way the world works. And I think the danger there is that I think a lot of people, wouldn't mind living like that, right? It's actually easier to live like that, right? Because think about it. What's easier and less stressful to live in? Having all the answers and having a great leader to guide you and having a God Emperor to guide you? Or be in my position, having to figure this shit out for yourself, I
mean,
right? That's right?
Well, I would say I think it's great we need to debate these people on the issues and I think what we need to do is we need to, I think we can win them over to our side, especially if we start with the small stuff. So from my experience, it's going to be very hard to talk them into mail-in voting and like mail-in voting, like they're strongly always going to be against that. They're always going to strongly be against that kind of stuff. But I've seen it where I've been talking to people who did support the election fraud, and I've noticed a different tone that they're more like they still think that Trump got cheated, but not because of election fraud, but because of the laws that were put in about mail-in voting. And so I think you can do it gradually. I mean, I always think working with let's take the summer riots, for example. What Trump did was absolutely moronic. What he did was he incited more violence. And he did that by saying, "Oh, when the looting starts, the shooting starts."
Right.
That's just going to enrage people. And then he didn't send the National Guard in unless the states requested it. What Trump should have done in that situation is he should have said, "I understand the tragic death of George Floyd. I believe that peaceful protest and some form of reform are needed. I stand with people peacefully protesting, but rioting is never okay. And we're going to have the National Guard deployed so that if rioting does start, not only will this protect the citizens and the local businesses, it'll also protect the peaceful protesters from getting hurt in that as well." And to me, that's speaking softly and carrying a big stick. And the same thing with these people who believe the election lies. Be kind to them, go to a ball game with them, speak softly, go to a ball game, be their friend, Um, but when they start pushing the big election lie, when politicians start speaking the big lie, you carry a big stick, you dispute it, and you do everything you can to fight to make sure that they lose that election.
Okay, so I guess I guess the problem that I have with that is that Trump wouldn't do that, though, and I think the reason why he wouldn't do that is that he's not concerned about how do we maintain order in America. He's concerned with how do we sow discord in America. He's a fascist, and I think if you said to him, you offered him the choice between peaceful protests and nobody gets hurt and democracy continues as normal, or shit hits the fan, people get killed, but hey, people hate each other now, and hatred's good for your ad campaigns and your re-election attempt. I think he goes with the latter, and I think he goes with the latter as well because his own son admitted that they got their financing for their golf courses post 2009 after they couldn't get loans from Deutsche Bank or any other Western institutions anymore because of the 6 bankruptcies. They got their financing through the Russians. And so what does Russia want to do? What does the Kremlin want to do? Well, they're basically following Alexander Dugin's playbook of the foundation of geopolitics, which is sow as much discord as possible in America and Western democracies, hype up the far left and the far right, and get them to burn their countries to the ground. We don't care who wins. We just care that America loses. And Trump owes money, big money, to the guy who's overseeing that campaign. And so you're saying, well, what if you're basically assuming that he has the best interest of the country at hand, but he made a mistake. Whereas I'm basically saying, no, he actually has the worst interest of America at hand. He has the Russian interest at hand. And he didn't necessarily make a mistake there. He's a fascist and he knew what he was doing. That's kind of my attitude, is that.
So I am far from, I don't think Trump had the best interest in the country, at least in certain respects. I mean, there's a reason I'm pro-life. I'm strongly against defunding the police. I think Biden and Democrats could have handled the riots way better than they did. But at the end of the day, I voted for Biden for a reason. Trump did a lot of messed up stuff. He did racist stuff. He did, more so at the end, anti-democratic stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a reason I didn't vote for him. Okay. So, but my point is, what he did was wrong, and it created chaos. My point was never that he did it what he thought was the best. Whereas, what I'm saying is the right approach would have been to speak softly and carry a big stick. With election truthers, that's what we need to do. We can still be their friend, we can still go to a ball game with them, speak softly, but we need to, whenever they start saying, look at this big lie, or when Cruz starts pushing lies, or when they're running for office, we need to carry a big stick and put that down, such as supporting Republicans in red states that believe in the primary, that believe in, actual democracy, such as Thune. I don't know Tishbaka's view on, I don't really know Tishbaka's view on democracy and all that, but potentially supporting Lisa Murkowski in that race. If Democrats who truly want to fix this problem can aid in by voting in Republican primaries.
Okay,
so to keep.
Yeah, I think we fundamentally have a bit of an impasse here, a bit of a disagreement, because your approach seems to be friends with them, but try to talk some sense into them. And my approach is, look, you're going to lose out more people trying to talk sense that wind up doubting themselves and fall into the cult. And when I say the cult, I'm not just talking about the QAnon crowd, right? I'm talking the whole Trump train at this point. And I think that it's ultimately a futile endeavor because they're in a stronger position in that dynamic because they have the answers for everything. And people like us trying to talk them out of it, we're rational people. We don't necessarily have the answers to everything, and sometimes we'll admit that. And a lot of people, they don't like not having the answers for everything. There's some people, fascism, here's the thing about fascism, it's not just that there's a dictator that likes to tell people what to do. That's part of it. Here's the bigger equation of fascism. There's a lot of people that love to be told what to do, and they love to be submissive. And that's what you need for fascism to take hold. And I do think in this situation that it's different. This is not the Republican Party of Mitt Romney. This is not any Republican Party since Lincoln onward, basically. This is different. And I'm not just saying that because I'm alive right now. No, I liked Bush. I liked McCain. I liked Romney. This is a little bit different. This is substantially different. And so my last question on this point before we can move on to another topic is that, you were talking about how not all of the election truthers or election fraud, whatever liners, not all of them supported storming the Capitol. And that's technically true. I was making the point that it's close, but I guess my question for you, my last question here would be, regardless of to what extent the election truthers overlap with the January 6th supporters, what do you do about that? There's a lot of them, not just a small minority, but there's a lot of them, even outside the Q crowd, that are definitively like racist. They've kind of taken the mask off in the last few years and come out as explicitly racist, doing white genocide memes, these types of things. What do you do about those people?
That's actually a great question. So to me, I see things like this. I think very few percent of the population legitimately believes in their heart that they're racist. Now, I think people commit racist actions that aren't necessarily racist. Like, I think there's people who fly the Confederate flag and they think, well, I'm not racist. I'd be friends with an African American. I'm fine with African Americans. I just like the flag because it's like Southern pride, and I think the same thing on the left. You got people who support BDS, and they're like, I'm not anti-Semitic. I know Jewish people. I have Jewish friends. My issue is like the Palestinians, and I think these people are doing things that are racist actions. I don't think they're racist in their heart. I think they have racist actions, and I don't think they understand the hurt that they're causing with some of these actions. So I think there are people that are legitimately racist out there, and I think that needs to be our number one concern. Because think about this concern. There's we don't want people who are racist being police officers. We don't want them being doctors because especially with the low African American infant mortality rate. So I think that's legitimately a concern. But I think what we need to do as a country is we need to try and, I think one good thing could be is to, try and just get to know other races besides your own. And I think seeing other races, other people with different beliefs really helps make our country is great because of our diversity, because of there's so many people who do that. We have people who provide different things to our thing. We have so many different races, beliefs, and it's truly what makes this country great. And it's sad to see that so other countries, including democracies, don't see immigration and diversity of thought and all that as great as we do.
So you supported immigration and whatnot then, right?
I think immigration is a great boon to our country.
Okay.
And I think it's great, and I think it makes people's lives better, not just the immigrants who are coming here, but also the people here. It stimulates the economy. And it's sad to see some on the right support things such as an immigration moratorium, which is widely unpopular, thankfully. Only 2 Republican House members, Green and Gosar, support a full moratorium. But immigration restriction is just as disastrous policy. I do disagree though with the more so pro-immigration crowd is I do support a wall for one reason. When people come here to this country, they try and immigrate illegally. a third of women coming here are raped, and that can't be happening. We need to do all we can do to stop the terrible evil, and I think a wall would do that, as well as prevent the cartels from being able to come in. Using our border to help prevent that. But I think we need a more inclusive legal immigration policy.
Yeah. I'm not in theory opposed to a wall. I see why a lot of the critics make fun of it and everything, but I also see the purpose of it, and I think that, America wouldn't be the only country to build a wall to secure its own borders. So, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I just I question if it's the best use of resources. I think you're probably better off with drones and hiring a few more border protection agents and that type of stuff. But I'm not an expert on the situation. I'm actually open to considering a wall. I'm not necessarily going to say I'm pro or against it. I'd need to look into it more. But I guess, yeah.
Again, I guess the wall is the most common thing. And as I say, I don't know the answers. We need more border security, drugs getting through. We need to stop that. We need to stop. We need to stop people coming up through, trying to come in illegally. Because on the journey, a third of women are raped, and that's terrible. And and to me, that's like, this is not a humane immigration. Like, if you're progressing, like, oh, we need to get rid of ICE and all that, and border security. And it's like, well, a third of women are getting raped, so I don't see how that's. It's a tragedy, and it's something that we need to combat, and stopping the evil of rape worldwide, I think, is very important. And I think if a wall of border security, which is, I want some form of increased border security, we can both agree on that. Correct?
Yeah, I've got a couple policy proposals here. I want to get your thoughts on this to alleviate that situation. This kind of goes back a little bit into what we were talking about earlier with communist China. What I propose is a three-front set of policies. First is a Marshall Plan equivalent, but for Central America, kind of like what was done in the early Cold War to rebuild Europe after the Western Europe after World War II, where you just kind of invest in a lot of projects to stimulate economic growth in countries like Honduras and El Salvador and Mexico and Nicaragua and others. And that this would not only reduce the number of people that would try to come to the U.S. because their countries would be richer, but it would also work to counter China, because China's really trying to get into Nicaragua and down the road into Mexico. And so it'd be a way of kicking out Chinese influence by basically investing in these economies with American dollars. And I would also support Canada joining that endeavor. But second element of this would be intervention in Venezuela and removing the Maduro regime, because upwards of 5 million people are having to flee that country, and a lot of those people are going to eventually make their way to the U.S. And they've already flooded Colombia, a U.S. ally, which is not necessarily, you don't like to see your allies overrun by refugees that they can't manage. And then the third front of this, and this goes to the drug policy, because I support the drug war, but I think it needs to be done properly. I don't really like the idea of imprisoning drug addicts and whatnot. I don't like that at all. What I would do is send troops into Mexico to actually go and fight the cartels and defeat the cartels and vanquish the cartels. So what do you think of each of those three proposals? Are you in agreement or disagreement? Where are you at with that?
Oh, all right. Well, first let's start with the Marshall Plan. I'm completely in, at least on some level, that I'd have to see the cost. Depending on the cost, what I might want to do is say, basically, we're helping build up your countries. We want, we want a cut of the eventual revenue, at least a small part of it, to pay back what we built in. So it's an investment for us and a win for them, depending on the cost. Because I think what would be better is, look, a partnership. What we have some say, I think that'd be much better for the countries as well, because right now their leaderships are kind of in chaos. So having a competent government come in would be a net positive for them, for only a fraction of the profits, like 5%.
Okay.
And it would be an investment for us, so people wouldn't be like, well, you're sending out tax dollars overseas. Well, you can get that back. And maybe even then some when this ends up being a huge success.
What about what about with Europe though? Because that didn't happen with Europe. The thing with Europe was just that you rebuild these countries and now they're trading partners where you don't specifically say we want X% of your economy or whatever. We just say you're in a better position now. There's way fewer illegal immigrants coming now, and we can trade more. So that's good enough. What about that?
Well, certainly I think we would be getting that, but would you want to put like anti-China and Russia language into this deal?
Oh, I guess I should have clarified that. Yeah, the condition would be there's no trade, there's no dealings with Putin and Xi Jinping. Like it's one or the other basically. Like if you're going to accept this money and it's going to be a lot of money, it's going to be pretty generous because this is in your backyard and you know, even if you didn't care about the people there, if you want to stem illegal immigration, a great way to do it is to make the countries that those people are coming from more prosperous so that they can be rich in their own countries and have their own homes and their own nations to be proud of.
Because that's what they want. That's what the people want.
Yeah.
Too.
But the condition is there's no wheeling and dealing with China. Likewise with the Marshall Plan, there's no dealing with the Soviet Union basically. So that would be how it would go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would want anti-China and Russian language in there, and I think that's reasonable. And then maybe the countries that don't agree with that, they can get like a significantly smaller aid, because like it would still be a little bit beneficial. But like if you agree to our deals, you're going to be getting a much better deal.
Yeah.
As for interview.
I just want to say to the chat right now, I can't read all the comments in the chat, but if I notice any sort of ableist slurs or whatnot, you're getting timed out, and if they continue, you're getting banned. So just a heads up to everybody. So, like, you actually have to keep it TOS. So, because likewise, like I said to Base Blue Dog, I'm like, as I say to all people that come on to debate me, just familiarize yourself with TOS, and if you violate it, we have to end the debate early. Likewise for the chat, Base Blue Dog hasn't violated TOS, but I've noticed a couple people in the chat tried tonight and they had to get timed out. We don't like to have to time out people, but again, any sort of slurs, ableist bullshit, any of that sort of stuff, you're getting timed out, and if you repeat it, you're getting banned. So just an understanding. I know there's some new people here because of the raid, so that stuff's not going to be tolerated at this channel. So I just had to put that note out. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with your policy on that as well. Yeah, so
well, it's not even my policy specifically, it's literally Twitch's policy. Like if I want to have this as my part-time job here, we literally have to do this. So if you like having the channel around, then don't slur. And if you're gonna slur, you could slur, I'm gonna ban your ass. That's what happens. So yeah. So, anyway, not to derail from what we're... wait, somebody asked to define slur. I don't have to. It's literally laid out in Twitch terms of service and community guidelines. And if you can't follow those, you're getting timed out or banned. It's literally that simple. So, they're not even my policies. So,
and even similarly, if you're on the fence, just don't say it. So, like, if you think it even might be a slur, just don't say it. Would be my advice.
Yeah, basically go to D Live if you want to do that shit. Like literally, you don't need to be in a Twitch chat. So, because I have moderators here and we will nuke you. So,
all right. So, intervention in Venezuela.
Yeah.
So, what exactly would that entail, in your opinion?
It would entail ground forces, aerial campaign, and covert ops preceding that to remove the Maduro regime from power and to instate the legitimate leader Juan Guaido as elected by the National Assembly or the Constituent Assembly, I forget the name of it exactly, as the president, as the rightful president of Venezuela. And yeah.
Look, there's no doubt in my mind that Guaido, the guy who he is the legitimate president, 100%. Now, to intervene, to start a war with Venezuela, I think, is there a war there currently?
In Venezuela, no. That's the problem, is that 94% of the country is in deep food insecurity, and millions of people have had to leave the country. Outside of Maduro's elites, almost everybody's basically on the verge of starving. And the problem is that there's been no war. The people are too weak and starving to even be able to fight him at this point. And so it requires an intervention to oust the regime and to solve that problem, because it's resulted in a massive refugee crisis, which is particularly afflicted Colombia, which, as you probably know, is not the richest country out there. They can't. They had trouble looking after their own affairs with the civil war with the FARC before all this shit happened, and now they've got this to deal with. So it's a problem, and this is America's backyard. This is America's, neck of the woods, and to see this sort of thing happen, I think any reasonable U.S. president would say, "Look, we're not going to stand for this." So that's my view.
Can I ask you this? I think, regardless of personal opinion on a war with Venezuela, it's unlikely to happen.
I know it's unlikely to happen. I'm just saying that that's what I would do if I was in charge. That's but
the Marshall Plan, which is the more reasonable, realistic plan that could happen. And the issue is with these refugees, they're all fleeing to Colombia, right?
A lot of them are fleeing to Colombia, but some of them continue onwards, right?
So part of this Marshall Plan for these states, such as that are accepting our plan, would be they have to take in some of these refugees, and we could lessen the burden on Colombia because they can't handle it right now. So we say, Honduras, you have to take X percentage. Nicaragua, whatever country we're helping develop, they have to take a percentage as part of the deal as well.
Okay, but that would be very expensive, though, because those countries are already very poor to begin with. So a cheaper temporary solution, pretty quick. Saddam only took 2 months to get rid of. Maduro would not take 2 months. When the Iraq War happened, now Saddam, he had the 4th largest military in the world, and it only took 2 months to have victory. In Venezuela, if the U.S. went in tomorrow, that war would be over in a couple of weeks. It would be very quick and very affordable. The solution that you're outlining of okay, we're going to accept that this starvation crisis is going to continue and potentially result in tens of millions of people having to leave Venezuela, but we're just going to pay people to take in refugees. That seems like such a long-term, expensive Band-Aid solution. Why not just do a quick and cheap intervention and get out, right? The Marshall Plan is already the way more expensive option here.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. You say earlier about the importance of, if you don't know, we don't have all the answers. And the truth is, on Venezuelan policy, I don't know a whole lot.
Okay.
On that issue. So I couldn't really speak to a potential Venezuelan war.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, that's a good answer. That's a good answer. I'd prefer that than somebody trying to BS me or something. So I appreciate you keeping it real with me. I want to just I just want to give a heads up to the chat right now. I saw some people were saying, "Oh, they didn't specify slurs." If you read the community guidelines and then you come away thinking any of the slurs that I saw people trying to say were cool, then you're not that bright. You're really not that bright. What are we in grade 2 where the teacher literally has to draw up a list of 300 things that you can or can't say because you're too lacking in intellect to interpret the spirit of what was written? I mean, come on. So, and again, seriously, there are a million other platforms that you could go out to. You got DLive, you got Gab, you got all this stuff. You don't have to be here. I would prefer that you leave as opposed to I have to ban you. It's really that simple. So, and I don't feel bad about banning you. It's just more effort on my part is the only issue. So, let's see. Somebody says later, Kev Hawk in Kev Hawk's chat. Only came in with Prime Kai's raid and only stayed because I was playing a game. Have fun promoting U.S. imperialism. See what's so funny there? Just very quick aside on that. Last I checked, the U.S. is actually the anti-imperialist one. Last I checked, it was Saddam that invaded his neighbors. Last I checked, it was Russia invading its neighbors. And last I checked, it was the U.S. standing up against these bullies in the world. So you can say imperialism, but if that's your definition of imperialism, then we're anti-imperialists. So cool. So anyway, getting back to what we were saying. So you were basically explaining how you don't necessarily have all the answers with respect to Venezuela. Fair game. So we can move on to the last issue, which was sending the troops, as Pete Buttigieg had proposed at one of the Democratic Party's primary debates earlier on later on last decade. He said that what he would do was send in troops to actually weed out the cartels, like go to the source instead of just playing whack-a-mole where you're just arresting the dealers and all this type of stuff. You actually go into Mexico and get rid of the cartels, because as far as I see it, a lot of the problems that Mexico has with their economy and their poverty stem from the cartels. And if you just destroyed the cartels, coupled with investing in Mexico, I mean, Mexico could be freaking rich if they didn't have to deal with that bullshit, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Let's help them do all we can with the cartel. That's, I think defeating the cartel should be very key. It's part of, to me, the compassionate war on drugs. We're not going after the addicts or the even the low dealers. Who we're going after is the big guys, the cartel. The high dealers. That's who we need to go after.
Okay, based, yeah.
And that's who I want to go after.
So you would send in troops, though, right?
Well, I'd have to look at the option fully, but it's something that should definitely be on the table. 100%.
Okay, based. That's more based than most people would be willing to say. So Pete Buttigieg is pretty based, and I believe he was the only one that had actually proposed that. Kind of like how Yang was the only one that had proposed UBI. I like that. I like creativity. I like original ideas. And after I heard Pete Buttigieg talk about that, I was like, oh, it's actually a very good idea, because you go to the source. You don't just for 40 years just keep on doing the same strategy and not really getting very far. You actually got to wipe out the cartels, right? Because the cartels, they run, for the longest time, they ran Mexico basically as their puppet state. And they had the cops, they had the army, they had the president in their pocket. Just a disaster, right? So
yeah, here's what I'm saying. We can look into sending troops in to combat the cartel. We can look into more border security to prevent the cartel from getting in. Yeah. We can look into giving Mexico money to handle the problem themselves. What we can't do is sit around and do nothing.
Yeah. Well, base, because there's a lot of isolationists out there that literally just want to do that. They don't want to do anything. They think that if they just ignore the rest of the world, that their country will just be fine. And it's an unbelievably childish worldview, you know. But okay, so that's all of the questions I had about this. We can move on. I've actually got time. I've got time tonight. We can do one more topic. Did you want to talk about those education committees, or did you want to talk about abortion?
Whichever.
Okay.
I'm gonna let you pick.
Yeah, fine. We'll talk about abortion then. You can keep this relatively short. You know, I know we're probably going to have a fair bit of disagreement here. I'm actually open to setting up a second debate with you. Some people don't get that, but you've been a pretty good guest, so pretty reasonable and not constantly interrupting. So let's get into abortion. So make your case for why you're against abortion rights.
Yeah, I'd definitely love to do a second debate sometime. That'd be great. But on to abortion. My belief is that all life, from fertilized egg to a 90-year-old man on life support, all lives to me have value, and I will always fight for the ability to for people to live and live their fullest life. And there's a reason to me in the Declaration of Independence they put life even before liberty. It's the greatest right we have, and something that I will always fight for.
So, what makes you think that life begins at conception? Or why do you think that, I guess to clarify, why do you think that life that it exists there without a brain, without any sort of a consciousness, why do you think that would trump the rights and the autonomy of the woman who does have a consciousness and does have a very functioning brain and awareness?
So, for me, first off, I would like to say I consider myself a feminist, so I like to support policies that are pro-women. I think we need to do more to combat the gender pay gap and stuff like that, and so I 100%. But as for abortion, scientists believe that life does begin at conception when the sperm meets the egg. And what I think we need to do instead of abortion is what we need to do is make sure, okay, do these women have access to health care in cases where do they have access to health care to properly be able to have the baby and be able to, so can we get them to a hospital? Can we get them health care so they can get ultrasounds and stuff like that? And in cases, the most tragic cases of rape and assault and incest, no woman should have to pay 1 cent for care to have the baby, to get ultrasounds and stuff like that. And I think we need more punishments on those rapists. They should 100% have to pay significantly more in child support. They shouldn't be allowed out of jail. Period. I think rape is the second worst crime behind murder.
Yeah. I got a question, brief question, kind of an aside. I don't want to do like a debate about this. If we disagree, we could do that at another time. But what's your view on the death penalty, just briefly? Because I actually support the death penalty for rape.
I oppose the death penalty. I used to support it because I saw these crimes so terrible. But at the end of the day, there's been so many, there's been just bad evidence. And even if we kill one innocent man who ended up being guilty, I think that's too many. And I don't think it's the place of the government to kill anyone. I don't think we should take any life because I don't think that makes us necessarily good. What I think we need to do instead is, I think, life in prison without parole. And that's what always irritates me. Like, the single greatest threat to the death penalty, the thing that will defeat the death penalty, is life without parole that we actually enforce. Because I think people will be less hungry for the death penalty when they see these murderers and they see these rapists actually getting life in prison without parole and not being able to parole or get off. There's a famous lawyer, Clarence Darrow. He's one of the greatest legal minds of all time. And he was arguing a murder case where he was like, yeah, they're guilty. Death penalty's wrong. Let's give them life in prison without parole. And that was very noble, and he did it. He successfully won them the case. What sadly happened, though, is they got out. One of them finally got out of jail. So that can't happen.
Wait, they got out after being given life without parole.
Yes.
Yeah, see, that's my argument, is that what happens if a governor or something happens in 40 years where people change the laws, where they retroactively release people, then it's not really security. I guess for me, for the peace of mind of the victims, especially when it comes to things like murder and whatnot, and there's always going to be that doubt. What happens if a bleeding heart comes into office and lets these thugs out? And so for me, I see it as the death penalty, it's not just a way of ensuring justice, but it's a way of ensuring closure, because no matter how much of a bleeding heart, progressive gets in power as governor in 30 years, you can't pardon or commute the crime of a dude who got put to death 20 years ago, right? So it's a final answer in that sense. It's final justice in my view. That's why I'm for the death penalty, is specifically in relation to life without parole. It's not to say that life without parole isn't a very strong sentence. My issue with it is what happens when it's not actually life without parole. What happens when it's life without parole until somebody feels bad for them and now they get out. So that's my problem. So,
well, first of all, I don't believe the state should ever have the right to take a life. I understand in war and stuff like that, it happens, and of course that's justifiable. But my point is that at the end of the day, and this is me speaking to the fellow anti-death penalty people, I agree with you. Let's end it. But you know what the single greatest thing you can do to end the death penalty? Fight for life without parole. Fight for that to become an effective and strong punishment that can actually be enforced. Make it stronger and make it a more powerful sentence. And that's how we'll defeat the death penalty. I'd love to see it banned, but I'd also love to see life without parole become a much more powerful force. And if you're anti-death penalty, you have to be pro-life without parole.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I can see that argument. I'm pro-death penalty, but if I wasn't, I'd agree with you. I'd agree with you on that for sure. I see what you're getting at. I guess we can get back to the thing about abortion. So my point with this, as I've argued in panels where I've debated this before, is that, and we have data on this, whether or not abortion's illegal, abortions are going to happen. It's just that instead of it being in an abortion clinic, it'll be in, dark alley or whatever with a coat hanger. And so you were talking about the health of women and that you care about that, but in reality, if you ban it, you've just made abortion far more less safe for women from a health standpoint, because those abortions are going to happen whether you like it or not. That's just the fact that they're going to happen. They've always happened, and they'll continue to happen, because you're going to have women that will get pregnant for various circumstances, and they're not going to want to bring that child to bear. And I believe that they should have the right to do so. But regardless of what I think or what you think, I could be the most pro-life, the most pro-choice, doesn't really matter. The reality is they're going to seek an abortion and they're going to try an abortion. So that abortion is going to happen. Would you prefer they be as safe as possible or as unsafe as possible?
Well, my belief isn't it's a either or choice. My belief is that what we need to do is we need to fund more police funding, as I supported Numa earlier. I've mentioned that, to make sure these illegal abortions aren't happening.
Wait, okay, but that sounds kind of like Iran, though, where you've got like the patriarchy police going around and, basically looking to see if there's any women that are trying to, be empowered and actually have autonomy over their own bodies and stuff. Like in Iran, they got the police for the prohibition of vice and the promotion of virtue. They go around and beat the shit out of women that, if they see them like having like an ankle exposed, that sort of thing, that sort of stuff. Similar thing in Saudi Arabia, this sort of thing. And likewise, obviously, that would apply to abortion as well. But the thing is, I guess my question for you is, well, that sounds like the most patriarchal police state that I can think of. That doesn't sound like a free country. What's up with that? What's up with that? So an agglomeration of some molecules that doesn't even have like a functioning consciousness or a heartbeat yet, you're gonna send the police. You're gonna sick them on women that are in a desperate situation, trying to rid themselves in some cases for a mistake, right? Sometimes they might have changed their mind. They wanted the kid at first, but sometimes they didn't know that they were even pregnant until they find out when it's they're at that point. So this seems like a grossly patriarchal, sort of like Mike Pensian dystopia, you know?
Oh, well, okay. Let me start with this. Let's say you gave me the situation where abortion's legal. Now let's say abortion's illegal, right? Regardless of what we think. Correct?
Okay.
Would you want people preventing the illegal abortions, which are dangerous, from happening?
Okay, I see what you're doing there. So in that situation, I personally would basically be out on the streets, demanding that the laws be overturned. As far as the conditions and whatnot being unsafe go, maybe this is a little bit of a hot take here. A little bit of a hot take. Maybe this one will get me into trouble. Because I know what you're getting at. And honestly, I got to say, it's a good tactic. It's a good tactic. You should do more debates. You should do more debates.
Thank you.
I've debated a lot of goobers that would not be smart enough to flip that back on me. So I respect that. I respect the game. You should do more debates. You should actually stream. But you should become a debate me bro. Now I disagree with you, but it's a good tactic, right? But here's the thing. It's a little bit of a hot take from me, but I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to answer it. You know, I'm not going to dodge it, right? No, I would support the women still getting an abortion because it would be an act of defiance against the patriarchal police state. And yes, some of them might die in it, but so would some of them if they say we were living in Iran and women went to rise up against the regime. Well, a lot of them did in 2011 and they got shot. A lot of them died. I supported them. So for example, and in here, I know it might sound kind of crazy to listeners. It might sound kind of crazy to you. I'm gonna try to illustrate why this is actually more reasonable than it sounds. Let's say you're in Iran and it's a dictatorship and women have no control over their lives and everything, and they, as well as other people, rise up against the totalitarian dictatorship. Now, a lot of them die in those protests. And regardless of whether it succeeds or fails, a lot of them are going to die. Now, if somebody said to me, I know, Kevin, that you don't like the dictatorship and you don't want the dictatorship to be there, but let's just say in this world, the dictatorship exists. Would you prefer that people rise up and die, or they just go about their lives and not die? I would say rise up and die, because freedom is worth dying for, and I would rather die fighting fascism than live under fascism. And so in this situation, I would rather that they get the coat hanger abortions and defy the regime at that point. So I know it's a little bit of a hot take. You might not have been expecting it, but I'm damn committed to this. I'm an actual feminist. So.
Well, look, I definitely believe I'm confident I'm an actual feminist too. And my point is that, look, I mean, if you support feminist policies, such as, do you support the Violence Against Women Act?
Do I support the Violence Against Women Act?
Yeah. I'm assuming you do.
Well, can you briefly go over specifically what's in that act? Because I'm not aware of the specific clauses in that act.
So what it does is it's like funding for like to stricter to go after like prevention for violence against women. It's just like but what it has in there, what I'm more familiar with, it's basically supported by all the Democrats and a few Republicans. What I'm more familiar with, it has two controversial things in it. It has like red flag laws, and it also has funding for some abortions in there.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that the abortion is actually, by having that in there, is holding back a very popular women's policy, because Republicans don't want to vote for that.
Did it? But it still passed, though, right?
It has not passed yet.
Oh, it hasn't passed. Okay. So, I would say on that, well, yeah, you could get rid of some abortion funding in that and put that in a different package. But I'm pro-choice, and I'd push back on your claim about being a feminist and being against abortion rights. I don't know any feminists out there that would accept that. Like, if you said that on any of these Twitch panels out there of feminists, they would laugh you out of the room. Like, it's like Mike Pence claiming that he's a progressive or something. It's not. I get it from like from an optics or a branding standpoint, but what you should probably just do is just own that you're not a feminist. I don't see why you want to claim that you are when you would literally send the police to arrest women for trying to live their lives and have autonomy over their own bodies. You're not a feminist.
Well, first off, what I'm saying is that if you ask me, I think it's wrong to pair abortion with feminism. I actually know a ton of feminists, or I know feminists who are pro-life, such as myself, such as Kristen Day.
Wait, I'm just gonna fact check this. Is that like a public figure or?
Kristen Day is the president of Democrats for Life of America, and there's also an organization called Feminists for Life, and so she is a pro-life feminist. And I think we should separate abortion from feminism, because to me, feminism is about fighting for equal pay, which I support. It's fighting.
So their revenue, I just want to be clear here. I'm just looking at, now I'm doing the Vosh meme now. I'm looking at Wikipedia, but I'm seeing this here that their revenue for the year of 2018 was $87,000 and their expenses totaled just over $88,000 and their employees number 7. This is a very small group and they seem grifty. They seem like maybe this is the conspiracy side of me. They seem like they're probably funded by Republicans. I'd have to see where that money came from, but it seems fake. It's kind of like Democrats for Trump 2020. It's like, okay, socialists for capitalism 2024. It's like, okay.
Well, I don't think a Republican-funded organization would have if you go on the website, they have posts about systemic racism. That's definitely not a Republican talking point.
Yeah, but if you wanted to co-opt the Democratic Party to serve a pro-life agenda, because for some Republicans, they don't actually care that much about any of this other stuff. There are Republicans out there that are literally proudly single-issue voters, and their single issue is abortion. Would those people be willing to fund a thing that virtue signals about Black Lives Matter to try to make people pro-life? For sure. I'm just saying it seems like a psyop. It seems like it's an attempt at co-opting the Democratic Party. But even if it's not, it's still very, very small in the political sphere. And so you can say it exists. Okay, but what I'm saying is that this is a fringe group of people and they're raw and they're not feminists. Like, they can call themselves feminists, but that's kind of like if, it's kind of like Kim Jong-un calling himself a capitalist. It doesn't really add up. It's not really true, right? Like, I can say I'm an attack helicopter. Does it make me an attack helicopter? No, right? So,
well, I mean, what I'm saying is, I think if you support increasing women refugees who are fleeing oppressive governments, if you support increasing fighting the gender pay gap, if you support better healthcare access for women who are pregnant.
Wait, you don't support better access for pregnant women because you want to make abortion illegal, and I've just explained to you that those abortions will happen either way, and your solution is send in the cops on them. This is not like this is pretty disgusting, I gotta say,
Well, where we disagree is I would rather prevent the illegal abortion. You'd rather have it happen. Your words. I would
shouldn't even be illegal.
Well, but what I'm saying is I would prioritize women's health over a political statement on abortion with coat hangers. Like,
but you wouldn't, though. You wouldn't, because I guess what you're failing to recognize is that those abortions will happen, right? Like, what are you going to do? Put them in prison for the entirety of their pregnancy, because they'll figure out a way to have an abortion in prison. Then what are you going to do? I mean, people figure out how to make shanks in prison, in like men's prisons and stuff. So women would definitely figure out ways to have abortions, even if you put them in jail. So they're gonna happen. So I don't like this attempt to gaslight. Now, you might not be gaslighting, you might actually be this naive, but I'm telling you, the real world is those abortions are going to happen. And I guess a better point at this point would be to say, why do you care so much? Like, we're not talking here about, oh, the baby's 2 weeks away from being born. We're not talking about that. You said life begins at conception. So in theory, if a woman wants to have an abortion 10 weeks in, you're against that. You think that should be illegal.
So first off, let me start with that my belief, I care about the rights of all marginalized people. I care about the women's rights getting trampled in Afghanistan. I care about LGBTQ rights being violated across the globe. I care about a fertilized egg or a 2-week-old baby in the womb being killed. I care about oppression against any
a zygote. A zygote, not a baby, a zygote, but okay.
So if you believed they were life, and there's a good amount of scientists, I believe one study said 95% believe that life begins at conception.
Okay, but there's a difference between life, because a fly is life, right? But if somebody said to you, here's a woman and you're going to make her life for the next 20 or 18 or 20 years hell, but you have to do it, or you can kill a fruit fly, what would you rather do? Well, I'd rather kill the fruit fly, but now I've just killed life. That fruit fly is a life. So this is very disingenuous, because if you were to ask those scientists, almost all of them, except for the Christian crazies of them, would say that actually, when we say it's life, we're talking in the same way that a plant is life. It doesn't mean that it's a fully functioning, viable, infant that can think and have a heartbeat and everything. I guess, look, we can't go all night with this debate. So what I want to kind of pose to you here, and I'm open to actually having a full debate on this at a later point in the future, but what I want to propose to you here is that how about we have a compromise, and we accept Roe v. Wade as the compromise, because that was the compromise between the conservatives and the liberals, is you don't get to have an abortion at any point in the pregnancy, but you also don't get to prohibit abortions at any point in the pregnancy. We have a compromise where women up to the point determined under Roe v. Wade are able to, I believe up to the second trimester, able to get an abortion.
Well, my belief, I would never, you don't compromise you don't compromise with human rights, such as in Afghanistan. You don't compromise on human rights. You don't compromise on them. And when life begins, so is, to me, conception. And there's a good amount of Americans who believe that as well. So
okay, but those people are wrong. Those people are lunatics. Those people are misogynists. And here's the thing. It's such a false equivalence, though, because you're going to compare now women getting raped and tortured by the Taliban to an agglomeration of molecules that has no heartbeat and no brain activity being expelled from a woman's body, to both being a violation of human rights. But the other one isn't, it's not actually a human in the moral sense of how we constitute a conscious being. It's simply not. So I guess the question that I have to ask for you here is, are you religious?
Faith is a very important part of my life. I pray to God every day, but even from a secular point, I believe in pro-life policies. Because let me ask you this: if you believed that fertilized egg was achieved personhood, so thus a person, would you support ending abortion?
It's not, though. Like, I live in the real world. There's no world in which we're going to pretend that a fertilized egg has a heartbeat and has a conscious frontal lobe that can process, and think for itself and all this sort of stuff. That's just not a thing. And so for me, I'm obviously not religious. I'm anti-religious. I'm an anti-theist. So I'm not just like, oh, live and let live. I'm actually opposed to religion. So and you're making a good argument tonight for why people should be opposed to religion and not just neutral about it. So,
well, look, I mean, China, Russia. Well, China, communist China, has a very anti-religious campaign in their schools, and that country's failing its people. Religion is brought a
I agree, but like that's like comparing saying, oh, well, the Soviets were against religion. It's like, okay, but I'm a humanist. I'm not a communist. I'm against them because they're a totalitarian hellhole, and the Soviet Union was a totalitarian hellhole. I believe in liberal democracy, which also is free from tyranny. And so you can be religious. I'm not going to lock you up for being religious the way that they do in China, but I don't believe that religious people should have the ability to force their code, their patriarchy down our throats. And so I'm a humanist, and the reason why I'm an anti-theist is the same reason why I'm against the Soviet Union or China or Iran, which is that I'm against tyrants. I'm against tyrants on Earth, and I'm against tyrants in the sky. And so I'm against tyrants real and imagined, and I oppose all of them.
Well, what would be your plan to prevent religious people from having a say in the government, or having a say to inflict their quote-unquote moral code?
Oh, well, they can get elected to government and everything, but if they're going to pass shit like this, I would oppose it. Like, it's really that simple. It's really a matter of education. It's a matter of, getting people, the internet is a great tool for this, getting people to just kind of wake up, and this actually transcends the whole liberal or conservative thing. I debated on Hippy Dippy a couple months ago. TikToker, big conservative TikToker, Cam Higby, and he's an atheist. Like, people are waking up. Even conservatives are waking up and realizing that, yeah, there's no God. Like, what are we doing? We really, we're going to be grown adults and we're going to be clinging into fairy tales and stuff like that. No. We can be conservatives, but we're not gonna be holding on to dusty old tomes from thousands of years ago of desert people morality back before we had any sorts of technology that they could even imagine. And so for me, you can say, oh, well, in China they're against religion. Yeah, we're not the same, though. I believe in property rights, human rights, freedom, and human dignity. The communists over in China don't believe in any of that shit. And here's the reason why they're against religion, as Reese, Spooky Nukies points out, as Christopher Hitchens pointed out, it's not that they're against religion because they hate what religion is about. It's that they view religion as competition. They want Xi Jinping, they want Chairman Mao to be the god. So they view the church, they view the mosque as competing with the Communist Party, and they want the Communist Party to rule everyone's life. And so for me, I don't want any of that bullshit to rule anybody's life. I'm against tyranny. I'm against tyranny of the real form in communism and fascism, and I'm against tyranny of the imagined form in religion, because it has a real effect on people's lives. So I've taken the anti-theist pill, and I would hope that you do eventually as well, and the viewers as well. So,
well, look, I'll hope and pray for you, and hope and pray for the viewers that you find the Christian view in Christianity. It's we believe strongly in the rights of people. We believe in, Christianity has done a ton for people in ancient Rome. When Christianity came, gladiator fights got outlawed, and Roman rights in Rome generally went up.
Yeah, did a lot for Jewish people, did a lot for women persecuted. It really did a lot for a lot of people. Did a lot for gay people. Did a lot for a lot of people, kind of the same way that Hitler did a lot for Europe too. So, and he was also religious. So, I think we're at about the point right now where we should probably wrap this up. All that I'm going to say here, and then we can go into closing remarks. All I'm going to say is that I hope. Look, here's the thing: we can disagree on all this stuff. The only thing that I really don't like I don't like the patriarchy. I don't like the cops on women, that type of stuff. But here's the thing that I really didn't like about this, though. I didn't like you trying to appropriate the label of feminist to brand patriarchal bullshit. I guess my only ask of you, I'm not asking you to be pro-choice here. I mean, it's a debate. You don't change people's minds that you're debating. You hopefully change the audience's mind. I'm not saying please agree with me. I don't actually care. You can do what you want. All that I'm going to ask here is that you stop calling yourself a feminist, as long as you hold this view of women's bodily rights. Simple ask. What's your response?
Hell no. I'm a proud feminist, and I will continue to fight for women regardless of what anyone else thinks.
Yeah, except nobody believes that shit, and every woman would laugh you out of a room if you ever said that. That was pure cringe. But that being said, despite all of that, you're still one of the better debate contenders I've gone up against. So I am down to have another debate with you, and we can go into more detail on this issue. Feel free to make your closing remarks, and then we can wrap it up.
All right. Well, I think we agreed a lot on the first two topics. The third topic, we didn't agree nearly as much, but to say the least. But again, thank you for having me on. And I hope the next debate we can have another productive debate. And again, I think that a lot of debate. I think abortion debates, though, in general, are probably the least productive because they're some of the hardest debates to have, and I've never really seen anyone's minds ever get changed. To me, that's one of the biggest defining things. But yeah, I would say, hopefully we can discuss some other things, and I will say this though, you consider America the most Christian country, correct?
The most Christian country? No. Armenia's more Christian than America. A lot of people in America are no longer religious, and a lot of people in America have different faiths. America's a very diverse country. The most Christian country in the world is probably either in Africa or in Eastern Europe, either Poland, Armenia, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. Any of these places are far more Christian. Ethiopia, any of these places are far more Christian than America. So,
and the Vatican obviously is probably the most Christian.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about the Vatican. That's actually a really good point. The Vatican, percentage-wise, is probably the most, since everybody that's there is part of the clergy. So yeah.
Well, I'm a pro LGBTQ plus Christian, and look, the Pope has called for worldwide civil unions. I think Christianity is I think the anti-LGBTQ stuff comes from a misinterpretation, but I think at the end of the day, Christianity has done a lot of good. Have people misinterpreted it for bad use? Yes, if people misinterpreted anti-religious movements such as the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Union, yeah, they've used that to abuse people as well. It's not the religion. It's the people. There's good Muslim people, good Christian people, good atheist people. I know all types. It's not about the religion. It's about the individual, and the people who use religion to violate it aren't really practicing it, that they're evil and they're using it as a tool to do that. And if it wasn't religion, they could easily use something else to cause evil. But that's for another debate, and I hope we can debate again. Maybe a little bit on abortion, but hopefully on more productive conversations. And I will.
Oh yeah, no, I'm down to debate education as well. I know you wanted to talk about that, and I think we had some disagreements there. And we'll pick up this abortion topic where we're leaving off here. So for my closing remarks, I just want to say we had a significant area of agreement with respect to China. We had some disagreement with respect to Trump and the MAGA cult. We had some agreement and some disagreement on Central America. And we have no agreement whatsoever on the abortion issue. I think it's very clear that as religious numbers drop off and more people wake up to atheism and eventually anti-theism, that ultimately it really won't matter what people, whether somebody says that they're pro-life or pro-choice, because by then so many people will be pro-choice that will win in the long run, despite whatever short-term cope in terms of Supreme Court packing that can be done by the Republican Party right now. I will close by saying that Aftershark in the chat had mentioned that Congo is the most Christian country, but I think he's going by total numbers. He says Romania is number 2 and Vatican's number 1, but I think Congo by population perhaps might be the most, but also China has a lot too by population, but Congo definitely is up there. When you look at countries that are the highest in religiosity, they tend to be very deeply poor. They tend to be countries such as Congo. And then the countries that are the least religious include countries such as Australia. And if you ask me, and this is an economic argument, I'm sure there are nice neighborhoods in both countries. I'm sure that there are people that have great lives in both countries. But if you ask me personally where I would rather live, I'd rather live in Australia than in Congo. But that's just me. And I think that you'll see that generally the countries that more and more people would want to live in tend to be countries that have lower levels of religiosity. And I think that stands because reason raises prosperity, and basically theism and lack of reason ultimately holds back prosperity. We're getting away a little bit from the topic, but I do think that abortion, fundamentally, if my opponent tonight were not religious, I'd be very skeptical to think that he would hold these views. And so I think that religion is ultimately the source of the problem there. And I'm also open to debating religion down the road. Thank you to everybody for tuning in tonight. This has actually been a very interesting debate. Thank you to Prime Kais for the raid earlier. So everybody out there, if you haven't done so yet, go check out Prime Kais over on Twitch, and he's on YouTube as well. You can subscribe to me on YouTube at Superpower Broadcasting. We're coming up on 1,000 subscribers over there. And follow me on Twitter at Kevin Castley if you would like to set up a debate with me. That's how you go about it. You shoot me a DM. We make it happen like Base Blue Dog did here tonight. So now the debate's over, where can the people follow you?
Oh, you'd think I was actually just going to say that. You can follow me at Base Blue Dog on Twitter. And I really hope you come check me out and see what I'm all about. And I hope to be back on here sometime for another debate. Maybe we could debate that religion debate that you've mentioned. We'll have to see.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, you have a good night, and thanks for coming on, and thanks to everybody in the chat. Yep. Take care, everybody, and stay based. Keep on rocking in the free world. Peace. Okay. And let's just close out of the Discord icon. There we are. Okay. So I don't really do like separate post shows anymore. I'm just going to give my thoughts very briefly here. Thought it was obviously a better debate than the one last night to anybody who had tuned in. The one last night was a disaster. And yet I had people tonight. Kind kind of say that this one was going to be like a crap show and everything, you know? And there have been a lot of hype around me and Blue Dog debating, but it was actually far more cordial and serious of a debate than I think